It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Saturday, November 28th, one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, back for another week. Jackson Heil, Nick DeLuca here with you. Thomas Quigley will be doing headlines. Our producer, Alex Wolz, here with us as well. And quite a Saturday post-Thanksgiving. Nick, how are you, brother? It's been a little while, and how was the Thanksgiving for you?
It was good. It was certainly different this year. I hope your Thanksgiving was good as well. I know for a lot of people around the country, that's the word that's being thrown around right now, right? You're not able to connect with the family in the way that you ordinarily would, and that's unfortunate. But you know what? If being safe and being smart about it means that we get to have Thanksgiving next year and more Thanksgivings to come, I think we're making the right decision, and hopefully we can see everyone soon.
Certainly is. It was a more relaxing Thanksgiving. That is definitely a certain. As much as I love my grandparents and love my family, it was nice to have a little less chaos for a change, but not something I would be interested in doing full time in the future, that's for sure. But glad to hear that it was an enjoyable Thanksgiving. It was enjoyable on my end as well. I missed the Sunday night football, which was disappointing to not have Steelers Ravens, but we'll get a Tuesday night edition as we find out this week, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later in the show. But we do have a jam-packed show for you because we're now reaching the time where kind of things are starting to gear up in terms of all sports are starting to come back slowly. And listen, the NBA is still a month away. The NHL is a little over a month away, but college hoops finally has begun, which means that I can now rejoice finally again. And a little semblance of happiness creeps out of me as I can finally watch a sporting event other than the 0-10 Jets every single weekend. But NFL playoff picture is heating up in that regard. College football continues to get a little dicey. So we got a jam-packed show for you. And Nick, we're starting it out with our first segment, and it's going to be in an interview format. Stefan Bondy of the New York Daily News, who, when I interviewed him, maybe the biggest mistake I've ever made in an interview, saying Stefan Bondy of the New York Post at one point. So you'll hear that mistake. And one of the biggest I think I've ever made in an interview, as we did that just about a little over an hour and a half ago. But Nick, was a pleasure to catch up with him and talk everything Knicks and Nets.
To be honest with you, I didn't really notice it until you pointed it out. So I guess that's out there for full public consumption now that Jackson Heil screwed up during an interview. So it is what it is. Yeah, it was really interesting to get his perspective on a bunch of stuff, right? And the Knicks, to me, are so interesting with a new regime and Leon Rose taking over and the draft pick of Obi Toppin. They signed Miles Powell and some of the free agency acquisitions, bringing in Austin Rivers. And where does that leave some of the players that they had last year with RJ Barrett, and where are things going to fit, and what does his development look like, and what does the future hold for Julius Randle? So many unanswered questions and things that we wanted to talk to him about. And he was great about answering all those. And we really were able to hammer home some of those points. And I'm just excited to see what the Knicks bring forward. It's going to be interesting. I think that's the overarching term and word of the year for the Knicks, because it's been so bad for so long, but there's never been any interest. There's never been that glimmer of hope like, hey, the Knicks might be headed in the right direction. Dare I say we may be getting there, not to say that the Knicks are back by any stretch of the imagination. This is not Texas, but you're hoping that they're headed on the right track. So that was encouraging to see and interesting to get his perspective on.
Certainly was, and his insight on the Knicks and their direction, and his opinion on the team right now, which I'll spoil it for you. It's not too great, considering he called it the probably least talented team in the NBA right now, which is a fair opinion as well. But again, you'll see what he had to say about that and a lot more, including involving some stuff with the Brooklyn Nets and their potential pursuit of James Harden or Bradley Beal. So that's coming up in a few minutes. The rest of the 11 o'clock hour, we'll be talking football. And Nick, it's been interesting because to me, Thanksgiving football, there's a lot of room to grow for me, I think personally, in that regard. And you look at what this past Thursday was without Ravens Steelers on Sunday night, because that was the game I think everyone was looking forward to. I mean, you're sitting down, you've already had dessert, you've stuffed your face with whatever pie you want to eat, and then you could just sit there and relax and say, hey, we got maybe the best rivalry in the NFL right now in the Steelers and Ravens, and that game gets canceled. And instead, you're given two just absolute duds of games in the Texans thrashing of the Lions and the Washington football team putting a stomping to the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry World. Nick, I think it's time to change the Thanksgiving tradition of the Lions playing at noon and the Cowboys playing at 4:30 every Thanksgiving. And I'm going to have some opinions on why that is the case, for me at least, but I think something's got to change. I really do.
You know that I have some things to say about that too, and we may push that towards later in the show in one of our newest segments that I'm excited about. But yeah, it's just you want the best football available, and I respect the tradition that exists, but at some point, I think the NFL may consider a change if people are not as interested in watching, and that's inevitably going to happen when you continue to run out the Detroit Lions, who have been pretty brutal in this stretch of Thanksgiving games the last 10 or so years, and in particular in the Matt Patricia era, have not really been inspiring at all. Mm-hmm. They've just really struggled ever since they made the change from Jim Caldwell, and that sparked some questions. Again, even on Thanksgiving this week, people were saying, oh, geez, I mean, it's year 3, and the Lions they're still terrible. What's going on here? So there's that aspect to it. Dallas has been good for parts of the last few years, and I don't know that you're going as far as to say the Cowboys need to come off. I mean, they were competitive last year for sure. Mm-hmm. I thought the game they played against the Bills wasn't the best a season ago, but it was at least interesting or exciting. That was a Dallas Cowboys team that had a shot at advancing to the playoffs, so that was interesting at least. But it's certainly something that needs to go under evaluation, and I agree with you wholeheartedly in that if we're going to keep seeing games that are just terrible, and it's all exacerbated by the loss of that Thursday night game with Pittsburgh and Baltimore and what happens there. But it's just unfortunate because you want to put the best teams in the spotlight, and you look up and down the schedule and you're sitting there saying there are a few other games that I would rather be watching right now than Washington and Dallas or Detroit.
I would argue it's
Houston.
More than a few. I would argue it's more than a few.
There are, maybe we'll go through and figure out which ones we wouldn't, and that's a short list. But it's just, I recognize and I respect the tradition. It's just a difficult spot for the NFL. But at some point, I'll tell you this, if it hurts the NFL financially to where people stop watching, they'll make a change. Make no mistake about that.
And we'll see if that ever comes. But I'll have my doubts that the Dallas Cowboys will ever get moved off Thanksgiving, and rightfully so, too. They are the Cowboys. They draw the viewership. And if there is a tradition in football, it's the Dallas Cowboys playing on Thanksgiving. But we will revisit that, and we'll revisit the Lions standing on Thanksgiving for some reason that I'm still trying to figure out. But that closes out the 11 o'clock hour. 12 o'clock hour, we will bring in our man Quiggs for some headlines, COVID-related, football-related, a lot of stuff to get to there. And we're talking college sports to close out the second hour as well. College football, specifically yesterday, Notre Dame with a big win on the road at North Carolina, potentially solidifying themselves in the college football playoff, but we will discuss that and a lot more, along with college hoops. As I mentioned, the return of college basketball in all its chaos. There's been tons of games canceled already, but there is a college basketball season, and for that reason, we can rejoice. We'll give you all you need to know, a little Atlantic 10 preview as well, given our Fordham status there. Tell you everything that you're going to want to hear about what's to come in this college hoops season. And then finally shifting to the 1 o'clock hour again, we'll bring in Quakes for some headlines regarding the National Basketball Association, some new signings there. And then DeLuca mentioned it, Rantsgiving, a little new segment we're coming up with. Things we're perhaps not too thankful for, but we'll be talking about it for sure. And I know we're going to have a lot to say there, and I'm excited for that one. So that'll be right smack in the middle of our 1 o'clock hour, and then closing it out with our picks for NFL Sunday. Lots of games to get to there, some good ones, lots of ones that I'm hoping will at least be better than what we saw on Thanksgiving, like you mentioned. But again, we will give our picks out right there. So that is what we have planned for today. It's a jam-packed show, and let's get right into it. Again, thank you to all our listeners on 90.7, YouTube, Facebook Live, wherever you are tuning in to us. We appreciate you, and we hope you enjoy our show today. And we'll start it out. Stefan Bondi coming on the other side of this break, talking Knicks, talking Nets, and we hope you enjoy. So let's get right into it. Stefan Bondi coming after this.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Jackson Isle, Nick DeLuca, and talking Knicks and Nets. And for that, we bring in a very special guest, New York Daily News Knicks reporter Stefan Bondi. Stefan, thanks for taking the time with us today. How's everything going?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. Obviously, the draft is always a big topic of conversation for the Knicks, especially recently. And with that, Obi Toppin falls to them at number 8. What do you make of the pick, and what do you make of Leon Rose's first draft in New York?
Well, I was a little bit surprised that, like you said, he fell to 8. I projected him in the top 5, and I was surprised that he got that low. I think the Knicks really wanted him. In fact, they considered trading up to get him. There were some discussions with Cleveland, who had the 5 pick, about moving up. So they were so happy to get him at 8 because they thought they had to get up earlier. They didn't have to trade up to get him. So I like the pick. I think he's more of a ready-made player than a lot of people in the draft. He's certainly older. He was the National College Player of the Year. Some people are concerned about his defense, and that's something he has to work on, especially when you play for Coach Tom Thibodeau. But I do like the pick, and I think he's going to be an electric-type player, a player that fans can really get excited about.
Stefan, you mentioned the Knicks coveted Toppin at the top of this draft. How do you feel the fit will be with some of the other pieces that the Knicks have with, say, R.J. Barrett and Julius Randle. They bring in Austin Rivers. What is the fit going to look like with Toppin in the fold?
Well, there is a concern about what you're going to do with Toppin and Julius Randle. I mean, they play the same position and they have similar style games. I think Toppin's more explosive, more pick and roll type of player, but you're going to have problems playing those two guys on the floor at the same time. So, listen, Julius Randle was never the long-term solution at power forward, but Tom Thibodeau's a win now coach. So if my guess is he's going to try to play Julius Randle in the beginning because, Julius Randle's been around for a long time. He's more of a polished player than Obi Toppin because Tom Thibodeau's going to want to win right away. But I think in order to get Obi Toppin the minutes that you want to get him in a rebuilding season as a rookie player and a top rookie player, you got to figure out something with Julius Randle. And I think at some point, whether it's at the trade deadline or before, they're going to figure out if they can deal Julius Randle because he represents not only kind of a block to Obi Toppin, but also his contract. If they were to acquire a star and they're in the market to get in a disgruntled star, you have to match salaries. And Julius Randle's making $18 million a year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they move on from Julius Randle. I think they didn't solve their problem at point guard in the offseason, and that's still a concern. I know they drafted Emmanuel quickly, but he's more of a two, I think. I think at this point, Frank Ntilikina is more of a two. So really they have Austin Rivers, who is, I like Austin Rivers. I think he's a polished player. I think he has a lot of experience. I think he brings some leadership to the table, but he's not your long-term solution at point guard. Dennis Smith Jr. has a lot to prove, and they're bringing back Elfrid Payton on a one-year deal. So out of those three, I don't see the long-term solution at point guard, and I think they need to get somebody who's young and able to get to the rim and shoot the three-pointer, and they didn't find that person this offseason.
Stefan, I thought you brought up a really interesting point with Tom Thibodeau being a win-now coach in a lose-now situation, and you wrote an article about that recently. I want to ask about the direction that Leon Rose took with that. Do you think that he sees something else in Tom Thibodeau, or is this more of a plan for Leon Rose to say, hey, maybe just throw this year, but we're coming soon to compete within the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that Leon Rose had a plan that carried out his original plan. I think they were trying to upgrade this roster. And what happened is a couple things. They weren't, players weren't as eager to play in New York as they thought they might be. And number two is the prices for some of these free agents like Gordon Hayward just reached an astronomical level. So they weren't willing. And I understand why. You don't want to pay 4 years, $120 million for Gordon Hayward, coming off the last couple seasons that he's had in that big time injury. So I understand, but I think they wanted to upgrade the roster more than they did. And I know Tom Thibodeau, I've heard he was pushing for win now moves, and it's hard you can't really overestimate how bad this roster is now. I think they might be the worst roster in the NBA in terms of talent. So it's going to be really tough for Tom Thibodeau, and don't forget this, Tom Thibodeau, when he took over Chicago, I mean, they won over 60 games in his first year. When he went to Minnesota, they were a bad team. They had a bad year. And what did he do? He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to trade 3 lottery picks for Jimmy Butler for a win now situation. So that's how he's wired. And it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with this situation. Because like I said, at this point, this roster is really lacking talent. And, Tom Thibodeau is a good development coach. He's shown that in the past. But he's also a winning coach, and he gets frustrated by losing, and it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with this roster.
You mentioned that the Knicks potentially have the worst roster in the NBA. You don't think that there's any possibility of them showing significant improvement, potentially with a play-in tournament making a playoff run this year?
Not based on the talent now. I mean, listen, the Russell Westbrook is still out there as a trade possibility before the deadline, and Victor Oladipo still out there as a possibility for a trade. But if you look at this roster right now, I don't see how they can make the playoffs. Sorry, Knicks fans. It's just my honest assessment of what I see. I don't really see how much beyond. I think they upgraded a coach because Tom Thibodeau is a really good coach, and I think Obi Toppin will he's going to take some time to develop, but I don't really see how they upgraded the roster that much from last season.
Yeah, I don't think you're surprising too many Knicks fans with that one. Speaking with Stefan Bondi of the New York Post, and Stefan, I think one of the big things that will be monitored
Of the New York Daily News.
Oh, New York Daily News. Apologies, that one completely slipped. My fault. Anyway, Stefan Bondi of the New York Daily News, and one of the big things I think Tom Thibodeau will be monitored on in his first 2 years is the progression of R.J. Barrett and Obi Toppin, of course, but specifically R.J. Barrett, who the Knicks took at number 3 in 2019. What do you make of R.J. Barrett after year one, and has your opinion on his ceiling changed after seeing him in his first crack in the NBA?
I think last year heading into the season, we thought of him as kind of this potential all-star, maybe a potential superstar. And I think that ceiling has dropped a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go crazy. He didn't make either of the all-rookie teams, which, is a problem for somebody who was picked 3rd overall and played as much as he did. But I still think basically the projection is almost the same. I think if he builds a jump shot, which was a problem, and we knew that was a problem when he was drafted, if he gets a consistent three-pointer and he gets a consistent jump shot, that's as high as his ceiling is. Right now, he does not have that. He didn't show that last season, but people look at his form, they think it'll be fine. Maybe it just requires repetition. Maybe it requires something else. But I think that's the key. Now, one thing he did impress me, of 2 ways he impressed me last season. Defensively, he gets after it. I mean, he's a dog. Like he and that, defense is about motor a lot of the times. That's about 80% of it, motor and effort and all that stuff. And he has that. And he has that drive to win. I see that in him. And he has that drive to play, and he's durable and he's strong. So he has the body and the mentality of a player that you want. It's just a matter of, like I said, developing that jump shot, which was really missing from his game.
We're talking about some of the young players that the Knicks have on their roster. Into the fold after the draft is Miles Powell. They sign him. He goes undrafted. A lot of pundits around the NBA thinking that's a pretty good signing, that Powell was a surprise to go undrafted and may make an impact. What did you make of the signing of Miles Powell post-draft?
I mean, they're signing him on Exhibit 10 contract, so he's probably going to be in the G League. I don't think he's gonna make much of an impact on the Knicks next season. They had two-way contracts open, and they used them on different players, so that shows kind of what they think of him. They signed Jared Harper and Theo Pinson instead. I don't know. I think Miles Powell is, he showed some people some good things locally and in the Big East, but I don't think he's projected as making much of an impact on the Knicks.
Stefan Bondi of the New York Daily News joins us on One-on-One. Stefan, let's shift over to the other side of town in Brooklyn, and the big talk there, the search for a 3rd star for Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. I want to put you on the spot here. There's 2 big ones who I think are maybe going to be that 3rd guy, Bradley Beal being one of them and James Harden being the other one out of Houston. Who would you say is the best fit for Brooklyn out of those 2?
Now, obviously Harden is a better player, but I really struggle with this idea of bringing Harden to a team with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant because, as it's been said before, and it's true, there's only one ball. And Harden, he commands it 80% of the time, and I don't know how you can fit a Kyrie Irving and a Kevin Durant next to him. I'm sure they can make it work. They're so talented, but there are issues there with how they're going to divvy up the ball, and the other issue is defensively. I don't think Harden has shown over the years. Sometimes he doesn't care too much about defense, and Kyrie Irving sometimes feels the same way. Now, Kevin Durant was a great defender, but he's coming off an Achilles injury. I think Bradley Beal is obviously not as good a player, but he is a better fit. I think he'll be expensive. I think that the Washington Wizards are coming into the season hoping to keep him beyond this season, and they have him locked up on a deal. Now, the John Wall situation needs monitoring because John Wall, according to reports, he wants to get out of Washington. And I think a big reason why Bradley Beal wanted to stay was to give it one more go with John Wall. So if John Wall's out of the picture, that kind of puts the pressure on Washington to deal Bradley Beal. And I think he's a better fit for the Nets right now.
The Nets are in a position where you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. If they're able to get that third star, you feel like they're already in the top of the East potential NBA championship contender conversation right now without it. If they're able to get a Bradley Beal, a James Harden, are they the favorite to win the NBA championship this year?
Um, that's tough. I mean, the championship, no, I don't think they're better than the Lakers. I don't think they're better than the Clippers. It usually, when you look at like the formation of these super teams, right? It usually takes a year before they really get it together and start clicking and show that they can do what they can do. You remember the Miami Heat when they got LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh? They lost that first year, and then by the second year, they got their timing together, they got their rhythm together, they got their cohesiveness together, and that's when they really became the juggernaut powerhouse that we thought they were going to be in year one. So I don't automatically put them, just because of the formation of stars, I don't automatically put them as a title contender. I think it takes time. And with this situation, it's even more difficult. You're having a training camp that's going to start in about a week, and it's shortened, and they're only going to have 2 preseason games, and then the schedule's condensed. It's a really difficult situation to take a new team with a new coach and a new system and say, you know what, let's get it all together in year one. So I wouldn't automatically put them as a title contender. I think teams that have been together for a long time really have the advantage in this upcoming season. But obviously the talent is really good and spectacular. You have Kevin Durant, one of the best players of all time, and he's coming off a devastating injury, so that requires monitoring as well. But I think if you add a third star, you're saying they're the favorite in the East.
Stefan, we talked about the third star in Brooklyn. Let's mention 2 guys that have uncertain futures right now, and Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert, 2 guys who, if the Nets were to acquire a third star, you would have to think would be going the other way. Do you think those 2 specifically, obviously it could be one or the other, are better served in going the other way in a trade for Brooklyn, or do you think that they should keep them around as guys who are significant contributors to what would be a very deep Brooklyn roster?
Well, if you're going to get a star, you got to trade one of them at least. I mean, you have to understand, like, the other team's going to want something. Yep. And I think Karis LeVert is the player that most teams covet in a trade situation. And I do think that there's some overlap between the two. Like, they're both ball dominant guards. And I, probably best suited coming off the bench on this team. And I don't think you really need both of them. I mean, it's good to have talent on your roster, but I don't think you need both of them. And I think one of them, Spencer Dinwiddie, if they don't trade for a third star, I think they're going to go for something else, maybe a 4. And I think Spencer Dinwiddie is a candidate to be shipped out regardless of whether or not they're going to get that third star. They're just going to go around the edges and get complementary pieces.
I wanted to ask you, Stefan, about Steve Nash and getting his first shot with the Nets. And of course, things are made easier by walking into a situation where you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving at your disposal. But he's put together an experienced staff. He's going to get some help from Mike D'Antoni and Amari Stoudemire, and a familiar face as well. What are the expectations? What can we expect to see from Steve Nash in his coaching debut with the Nets?
I think he's going to lean a lot on Mike D'Antoni, and I think they're going to try to establish that kind of 7 seconds or less system that they had in Phoenix, really up and down, scoring a bunch of points. I think that's the goal right there. I've heard a lot about Steve Nash as a personality. I think he's humble enough for this job. That was part of the conversation. But it was kind of a similar situation. He was just coming off his playing career. He never had a coaching job before, and he came in. He was coaching a bunch of stars, and what got in his way, certainly in the beginning, was his ego. Remember, he had an assistant coach, Lawrence Frank, who he hired to really lean on, and then it became, well, you're kind of overstepping your bounds, and then he fired Lawrence Frank very early in the season. I don't think that Steve Nash is the kind of personality to get jealous, to get insecure about something. something like that, and I think he'll work better with his assistant coaching staff. I don't know, though. I mean, you never really know about a coach, how good he is, how he's going to handle game situations until you see it happen. Now, obviously, he's a brilliant player, and that should translate to some degree to the sidelines, but it doesn't always. I mean, Magic Johnson was a brilliant player. He tried coaching, and it was a disaster. So we'll see what happens, but everything I've heard about Steve Nash as a person and his personality, I think bodes well for them.
Excellent insight, as always, from Stefan Bondi of the New York Daily News. Not the New York Post, as I accidentally said before, but Stefan.
Say that. That's the one thing you could not say.
And I managed to do it, unfortunately. But Stefan, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving, and best of luck with everything going forward, and stay healthy.
Thanks a lot, fellas.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Longest-running sports call-in show. Moving along on FUV, Jackson Isle, Nick DeLuca here with you. We just talked to Stefan Bondi. Moving on to NFL, but did a little mojo change. I was upstairs, had to change the shirt. Wasn't too happy with the Saints lacrosse shirt I was wearing. And in the spirit of college basketball, we'll rep the Terps, who are 2-0 today. So happy to rep that. But before we get into the NFL talk, Nick, I was listening to The Fan yesterday, I believe it was, and a caller called in and suggested that Major League Baseball should make a rule where if a fan catches a foul ball, it should be considered an out. And I was thinking about it. I'm not going to say they should do it, but I would love the intrigue of making the fans more involved in the game.
I just want to know what goes through someone's head. What's the thought process there where you're sitting there and saying, you know what I'm going to do today? Like, what's on my to-do list? And maybe it's Thanksgiving, so the schedule's a little light. But you're sitting there and saying, all right, at 12:30 or whenever you were listening, right now is when I'm going to call in and with a straight face seriously suggest that it should be considered an out when a fan catches a foul ball. Where are you?
You sound like Francesa right now.
I would love – no, I'm just saying, I would love to have that amount of time on my hands where that's my goal for the day. That's just me. I'm sorry. I don't even want to dignify that with really getting into why that's ridiculous. It's more just that's absurd.
I think it'd be pretty cool to try. Maybe like in an all-star game or something. That'd be pretty sick. test it out, get the fans involved. But yeah, no, I just thought I would share that. Nick, you were not as enthused by the idea as I was expecting. But anyways, moving along here on one-on-one, just past 11:35. Glad you could be with us wherever you are tuning in. 90.7 YouTube Live, Facebook Live. We're happy to have you, and we hope to keep you entertained over these next 2.5 hours. And let's get into some NFL talk. We mentioned what happened on Thanksgiving. I want to specifically focus on what's going on in the NFC East right now, because it is the worst division in football, maybe the worst division in the history of football right now, with the Washington football team sitting all alone in first place. And Nick, I said earlier this year on one that what the football team is doing with Dwayne Haskins is borderline criminal and perhaps worse than what the Jets are doing with Sam Darnold. And I still believe that is the case, because I think that if you draft a quarterback in the first round, as recently as the football team did, you should be giving him every chance to take that starting job. And listen, he won his first start this year against the Eagles, and since then it's been all over the place with Kyle Allen, then now Alex Smith. But I want to focus on Alex Smith for a moment, because I think personally this is maybe the best story in football right now that isn't getting the attention it deserves. Because do people remember what Alex Smith a year ago? It was pretty unlikely he would ever play again in the NFL, let alone the fact that he's still alive is pretty incredible, given everything that happened with his leg. It's lucky he still has that leg, let alone that he's still breathing right now, because that injury was one of the worst in the history of the sport. And on top of that, he had to have 17 different surgeries on his right leg just to keep it together. And it's kept together. If you look at his right leg now, it looks nothing like a normal leg, but he is playing football. And not only is he playing football, he's playing at a pretty damn high level right now. And he has the football team trending in the right direction. They're first in the NFC East. And what can you ask for as a better story in the NFL than what Alex Smith is doing right now? I think it's pretty damn cool.
It is. And there's so much to unpack with Washington about their quarterback situation, and then going back to what you said about Haskins, and that was really the owner Daniel Snyder's pick. And when you bring in a new head coach, you're not married to him, and there are some questions about not necessarily even Haskins's development, but then when he won the starting job, reporting that he wasn't really working hard. So there's a difference between, okay, do we feel like this guy is a viable NFL starting quarterback, or is he going to even put himself in position to be that guy because he's not putting in the necessary hours and work to do so? So there's a bunch there. Enter Alex Smith, who has done an excellent job of doing what Washington needs their quarterback to do. This is a team that is going to rely on its defense. It's the number one score. I believe it's the number one passing defense in the NFL right now, and they're doing a really good job. And you saw that on Thursday against Dallas. They were really able to hem in that offense. Again, not the best. They don't have Dak Prescott, but it's impressive nonetheless. So what they need out of a quarterback is someone who is going to get them into the right plays, make the right reads, take care of the football, and not turn it over. And Alex Smith has done almost all of those things. Now, he's not the same quarterback. He is not as mobile. He is not as explosive throwing the football, but that's to be expected when there is serious talk about, hey, is this guy going to live through this surgery? Are we going to have to amputate his leg? And to see the journey that he has been on, it's really inspiring. And you look top to bottom at this division, which is just incredibly awful and not helped by the schedule that they have to play, by the way.
Yeah.
Because when you break it down, they're playing the NFC West and the AFC North.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on when you catch San Francisco, right? If you played them at the beginning of the season, they're a much more formidable team. You might be able to steal a win now. But top to bottom, you're beating who? Cincinnati?
Maybe.
You're handing each team in this division 7 losses. Mm-hmm. Maybe six, because you can beat Cincinnati, and then maybe you pull it off against San Francisco based upon when you were playing them. But otherwise, you're not beating the Rams. You're not beating Arizona. You're not beating Seattle. It won't happen. So it's such a difficult spot for all of those teams to be in addition to just not being very good. So this division, of course, as we've said a million times, is wide open. I'm inclined to think that Washington now, with that big win, is in the best position. I like what the Giants are doing. I think the Giants right now are playing the best football, but that schedule is brutal going forward. So I think it's Washington's division to lose right now.
If I told you at the beginning of the year that it's likely going to be between the Giants and the Washington football team in the NFC East, if you had a gun to my head and made me say that, I don't know if I would say it, honestly. And it had to be the truth, because I wouldn't believe it. I certainly wouldn't. But somehow we are approaching the second half of the season. We're actually fully entrenched in it now, and that is the case right now with the 4-win Washington football team atop the NFC East and the Giants close behind. And I agree. I think it is the football team's division to lose. And I'm going to pose a question to you, because I think that amongst the storylines with the football team that need to be talked about in terms of just guys who have stepped up this year. I mean, Chase Young, second overall pick from a year ago, he's been terrific. And the defense as a whole has been excellent. How many receivers in the NFL are you taking over Terry McLaurin right now? The list is very short, because what this guy is doing is now his third quarterback this year. We've gone from Dwayne Haskins to Kyle Allen to Alex Smith. What Terry McLaurin is doing this year is remarkable. And to me, I think there's a clear argument that he's probably a top 5 receiver in the game right now. And what he's in year 2. He's in year 2 right now, correct?
Mm.
And what he's doing so early in his career is terrific. And to put it in betting terms, he's hit his receiving yards prop in 10 of 11 games this year, which is incredible in itself. And he's had at least 7 catches or 100+ yards, I believe, in what is 8 straight games now, or something crazy like that. So I'd argue that there's not a more valuable receiver right now in the NFL than Terry McLaurin, because what they do on offense entirely runs through him. I mean, he had 7 catches for 92 yards on Thursday, and there was not a single other receiver on Washington with more than 21 yards. And yes, Antonio Gibson has been terrific, and what a bright spot he's been. But I mean, that entire offense runs through McLaurin, and the fact that he's been able to perform at this level, pretty much getting double coverage every week, getting the top corners every single week, it's really impressive. And I think he's a top 5 receiver in the league right now, and maybe the most valuable one as well.
If not a top 5 receiver, he is very close. And what's been more remarkable, even you talk about McLaurin, in addition to the 3 quarterbacks this year, he had 2 last year. So it's 5 in 2 years, and he has put up the production that he has. And you talk about the value, he was a 3rd-round pick. So as valuable a receiver as there is in the game right now, and he may not be playing on DeAndre Hopkins' level or a Michael Thomas level necessarily, although I'd take him over Michael Thomas right now in production-wise.
Agreed.
It's the contract, too, and it's the money that they're saving as playing a bona fide number 1 receiver on a 3rd-round rookie contract. So that's the benefit that Washington is getting right now. But it's amazing because they have really sort of conjured up some weapons with 3rd-round picks with an otherwise, barren cupboard. There's not a lot there in Washington's offense. There's really not. I think their offensive line is maybe a little bit underrated. I think they can get some things done and create some room. But Antonio Gibson, I'll loop him into this too, and Terry McLaurin have really just transformed this offense into being anything close to viable. And look, let's not pretend like they're still not a 4-7 football team that is playing fantastic games right now. They're not, and they beat Dallas. Okay, a lot of teams have done that this year, actually 8 of them. So it is what it is. But you can't say enough about the perseverance. You like the mentality. You feel like there is a culture shift, and McLaurin is probably at the forefront of that more so than anyone on the field for Washington, and embracing what Ron Rivera has come in and tried to be all about. Him becoming a team captain, talking to the team after one of their wins and saying, we've got a division that's up for grabs and let's go and take it. And nothing better epitomizes that mentality than him on the chase down on the Jalen Smith interception, where he saves them 4 points just by working his butt off and hustling. So really impressed by what Terry McLaurin has done, and then Antonio Gibson the same way. There's not a lot on that Washington offense, and to see those two young players, third-round picks, where, yes, you're hoping to get some production, but not like this from those two, and that's why Washington is in the driver's seat in the NFC East, despite not having the greatest of records.
You made a good point as well, because I don't want to get carried away here, because if we're being honest, this is still a pretty horrific football team. I mean, you look at their wins this year, it was a week 1 win against the Eagles, who are terrible. It was 2 wins over Dallas, both being without Dak Prescott. So that's not a whole lot to get pony about. And then a win over the Bengals in the same week where Joe Burrow got knocked out for the entire season. Again, the Bengals were winning up until Joe Burrow's injury. So those are the 4 wins for the Washington football team. And the rest of the way, it's going to be difficult too, because you got the Steelers next week, who are still undefeated. You have the Niners, who, as you mentioned, depending on when you catch them, it's not going to be great, but they're starting to get healthy again. Finally, they're starting to get some of their weapons back. I believe Mostert, Deebo Samuel, and Richard Sherman are all returning this week. So that's a good sign for the 49ers. Seattle's a tough game, even with their deficiencies on the defensive end of the football. The Panthers, who, listen, they're not great, but I still think they're a better team than the Washington football team right now.
They'd be in the conversation to win the NFC East.
They would be winning the NFC East in all likelihood if they were put with that the same schedule as that. And then you close out the season with the Eagles, which, again, is another horrific football team that we have mentioned, but it's still a tough game nonetheless, because Washington isn't very good as well. So I don't see many wins left on the schedule. At the same time, as you mentioned, though, if you move over to the Giants' schedule, their really only winnable game is against the Bengals too, and they get another division game as well. But it's really going to come down to it. I mentioned this the last time on NFL Friday. Which one of these teams can win a game out of the division for the rest of the way? I think that's going to be how this division is decided, to be completely honest with you. And listen, that Week 17 matchup between Washington and Philadelphia, in all likelihood, will probably be the difference maker. But if Washington can get a win over one of Carolina, Seattle, or San Francisco, they're going to win this division, because I'd set the over-under in terms of the division winner at 5.5 wins, and that might be crazy at this point, because I think 5-11 could realistically win this division right now. And the fact that we're saying that is crazy in itself, but I just don't see many wins for these teams, because the Giants get the Bengals this weekend, or tomorrow, I should say. And then after that, it's a complete disaster of a schedule.
Yeah, you look up and down, and it's not crazy to say 5-11 could win this division, because you're sitting there and looking up and down the schedules and saying, where do these wins come from? They're not there. And it's so weird to even say that, yeah, I like what Washington did on Thursday, and I like sort of where they're headed. But I also don't know that they are – I don't think they are the best team in the division, but are going to win because the Giants are kind of out of room here. There's really only one more winnable game for the Giants the rest of the season, maybe 1 or 2. So you're trying to balance all that. It's tough, and this division is brutal, and it's anyone's guess. Because then, Dallas, as poorly as they've played this year, they go out and they win a game against Minnesota. And that's what you love about the NFL, any given Sunday, and it's so unpredictable. I'm really excited to see how this race finishes up. There is some beauty in looking at the car wreck. You can't turn away. You have to watch at how bad this division is and has become. It's anyone's guess. These teams are so unpredictable in that any one of them can sit there and win any game, can lose any game. Well, maybe not win any game. We know that there are a handful of games that they're going to lose, but certainly lose to anyone. And that's an unbelievable quality in a division where, 5 wins might be enough.
What's crazy is that, every team, other than Washington, it's 3 3-win teams and a 4-win team, and every team has a path to get there. You can realistically look at the schedule for each team and say, listen, we can win 2 more games and win this division and just find a way to get it done. And it's not crazy to even think that. I'm looking at Dallas right now. They have Baltimore. They're supposed to have Baltimore next Monday, but I mean, they play the Bengals, Niners, and then they close out week 16, 17 with the Eagles and Giants. So, like, if they win 2 division games and beat the Bengals, that gets them to 6 wins, and that might be enough. But obviously, who the hell knows if that team can win 6 games? I don't think it's going to happen. But personally, I've been saying I think the Giants are the best team in the division right now, and I think they're going to come away with it. But I want to move on because I can't talk about this division any longer. It's too horrid to continue conversing about it. Let's move to Tampa Bay because that's something that is really an interesting dynamic because you look at what the Buccaneers are doing and you look at this team and say, hey, much improved in terms of the win and loss column from last year. They're 7-4. They're second in the NFC South, fighting for a wild card spot, but yet things are kind of in turmoil a little bit in terms of what's happened on the offensive side of the football because they've now lost back-to-back primetime games at home, one being a thrashing against the New Orleans Saints where they were down 31-0 in the first half, and then most recently to the Rams at home. Nick, what's going on with this offense in Tampa Bay? Because I want to get your perspective on it, given specifically that dynamic between Tom Brady and Bruce Arians.
They are uncreative and not playing to the strengths of their personnel, and that's coaching. So Tom Brady at 43 years old is not someone who is pushing the football down the field the way that Jameis Winston did last year. In his last 9 attempts of 15-plus yards, Brady's 1 of 9. That's not very good. I'm not good at math, but that's not good. So when you are continuing to ask him to throw the football down the field, I know you have weapons. You have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but that's never been what Tom Brady has been about, and they continue to do it. It's pretty incredible. They don't have a running game to spread things open, to make teams respect the deep shot in the way that you would want to work off of that. Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette have not been fantastic in that backfield tandem. And then at that point, you're not running what Brady has been accustomed to and what makes him most successful. And that's not all on Bruce Arians necessarily, because Tom Brady has certainly lost a step. There's no denying that. He is not playing at the level that he has at times back in New England. But you have to play to his strengths, and they're not doing that. You have to spread – the biggest thing about Tom Brady, you have to spread out the formation, and here's why. The biggest thing about Tom Brady at 43 years old, and the most remarkable thing, is he's got 20-plus years of being an NFL quarterback and looking at defenses across from him. How much knowledge does one accumulate 20-plus years in reading defenses and understanding what they are looking to do to you?
It's a lot.
What is the primary advantage of spreading out an offense is you are forcing a defense to declare itself. You can't disguise the coverage that you are in when you spread things out because you run the risk of being out of position. There are only so many things you can only disguise from one so far because you have to move, from pre-snap to post-snap. So if I'm going to disguise like I'm blitzing, I can only get to the slot. I can't get out toward the sideline or whatever type of variation of disguise and coverage that you want to use. So what Tampa Bay is not doing very well right now is they are not spreading things out and getting a defense to declare itself. And they've got so many weapons to do that. They've got Antonio Brown. They've got Evans. They've got Godwin. They've got Gronk. They can do all those things. And yet they seem to be insistent on running this type of offense that is more suited for pushing the football down the field and operating with Jameis Winston. There were times where New England didn't run the football very well when Brady was there either. What they did was hammer the short and intermediate passing game as an extension of the run game, get players out in space, play matchups, and Tampa Bay isn't doing that right now. It's not all on Bruce Arians, but a lot of it is, and I don't really like what I'm seeing out of their offensive play calling right now, and he better be careful because it is very clear with the signing of Antonio Brown that Tom Brady has a lot of influence in coming to that Tampa Bay organization, and at some point, if this team is not successful and continues on the trajectory that they are on right now, Bruce Arians may be out of a job in short order because Brady doesn't have a lot of time left. He's not going to be patient about, let's see how things go in year 2. if he's at odds with Bruce Arians, we know who's going to go, and it's going to be Arians, and he better hope that they can turn this thing around, because if not, he's going to be gone.
With you explaining the spreading out of the offense, I feel like I was in that Office scene when Oscar is explaining the budget to Michael Scott, and he's just like, all right, explain this to me like I'm 5. That was a very good explanation as to what's wrong with this offense, because I completely agree. I think that you look at what the main problem is, in addition to Brady not being that good, in my opinion, because I think we're at that point in Tom Brady's career where personally, I was of the opinion before the season that I would have rather had Jameis Winston starting at quarterback than Tom Brady. Just because I think that in Bruce Arians' offense, which is largely meant for what we've seen in the past with what Carson Palmer did in Arizona and what Jameis did in his year with him in Tampa Bay, it's a big play offense, but it's also a turnover-prone offense, which is why Jameis Winston threw 30 picks last year. And that's also on him because, listen, it's Jameis Winston. There's not much explanation to do there. But I think that a lot of it is just that they're not on the same page right now. And it's crazy to me because this is a team that is likely going to be end up in a playoff spot because what they do on defense is terrific. I mean, this is one of Brady's more talented teams, honestly. Like, if you look from a talent perspective, defensively, they are terrific. They rush the quarterback really well. Their linebackers are terrific, and they play really damn good defense. And Todd Bowles has done a terrific job in Tampa Bay with that defense as well. And on the offensive side, I mean, I think the offensive line is pretty good. It's not great, but it gets the job done. You have talented running backs there. I think Ronald Jones is, in terms of talent, is one of the best 10 running backs in the NFL. And the weapons are the weapons. I mean, there's not really much to mention there. I mean, you have a Hall of Fame tight end. You have a Hall of Fame receiver in Antonio Brown. You have maybe the best slot receiver from last year in Chris Godwin. And then Mike Evans is Mike Evans. He's one of the best deep ball threats in the NFL. So, like, if you look at the skill positions and you look at the defense, this team should probably be one of the best in the NFL. And listen, I mean, at 7-4, they're pretty good. But I think that in addition to the play calling, which I agree, I think that is an issue in itself. At some point, I think we got to acknowledge that Tampa Bay has a quarterback problem. And Brady, I think, is a big part of this because he's not really a guy who's going to make many plays down the field, like you mentioned. And if Arians isn't going to commit to the short and intermediate pass game to make up for what the run game has not been able to do, then this isn't going to work out. And like you mentioned, Tom Brady seemingly has a lot of pull in Tampa right now. And Arians is going to be without a job. And honestly, I don't think he should be without a job for very long because I think there are a lot worse coaches in the NFL, particularly in New York. There's one of them who's a lot worse than Bruce Arians right now. But I think you diagnosed the problem really well. And it'll be interesting to see if they adjust down the stretch because you got two guys with really big egos in Bruce Arians and Tom Brady. And when heads like that clash, it usually doesn't end well.
No, and the one last thing that I want to get in here, when you mentioned Jameis Winston and the transition, I don't think you're crazy to say that either. The two differences between Tampa Bay last year when I believe they were 7-9 and this year where they are better is that Brady is doing a marginally better job of taking care of the football, right? So Tom Brady had 8 interceptions last year. He's already got 9 this year through the first 11 games that they've played. So it's not good, but it's better than the 30 interceptions that Jameis threw.
Oh, there we go. We got him back. DeLuca, we lost you for a second, but you're back.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm sorry. So then you missed what I was saying. And part of the issues there with Bruce Arians and Tom Brady. I guess the biggest takeaway, and I'll just finish up on this, is that part of the issue, they're both are related in that Tom Brady is not the player that he once was, and it's the coach's job to cover up some of the deficiencies that weren't there previously. So Brady is not the same type of player. He needs a coach who's going to play to his strengths more so and can overcome the bad coaching the way he's never had but could have because he was that type of player. Arians has got to wake up, and Tampa Bay will have to figure things out.
So we got DeLuca's point in there, and of course, right when I came in is when we got you back. That seems to be how it works. It's just the timing was clearly off there, but again, glad to have you back, and it will be interesting to watch going forward because I think this is a team. This is a championship caliber defense with a quarterback problem on the offensive end, and a coaching problem as well in Bruce Arians. So it'll be interesting to watch, and that'll wrap up our NFL talk. That'll wrap up our first hour. We'll let the station identify itself in a moment. But when we come back, our first headline segment with Thomas Quigley. So be sure to stay with us. 2 hours to go here on One-on-One. We're shifting into NFL Sunday, and that's always an exciting time. So it is now officially Sunday here on WFUV. Let's let the station identify itself, and we'll get to headlines when we come back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Everyone's lives upside down this year. It's the reason we're not in the studio right now, and it's continuing to dominate sports headlines. Fordham men's basketball regular season opener has been postponed after members of Manhattan College tested positive for COVID-19. John Rothstein of CBS Sports reports that there are at least 36 college programs currently on pause due to positive tests. With the number of cases steadily rising across the country, how do you guys see the pandemic affecting the college basketball season? Jackson?
Well, Tom, it's great to have you on. And it's going to be interesting because we've already seen how it has completely influenced the dynamic of the college hoop season. I mean, we mentioned it with Fordham. Their first two games have already been canceled. The women's team is likely already going to have a game canceled against Manhattan this upcoming week with their program now shutting down. It's a disaster. But at the same time, what I think will make it really interesting this year is that there's going to be a lot of games scheduled on the fly. I know that just recently, Baylor, whose head coach Scott Drew tested positive for coronavirus and they had to cancel a few of their games, they're now scheduling last-minute games this weekend. And a lot of teams are saying, hey, we want to schedule a game as soon as possible. We're willing to play literally anyone, which I think is really cool for college basketball because, yes, I mean, coaches for the most part will schedule pretty much anyone, whether it's for competition purposes, for money purposes, to get a bye game at home. But for this, it's really flexible because teams are desperate because there wasn't much of a preseason. And a lot of teams are rusty because if there was one positive test, they would have to shut down for the large portion of the preseason. And it was a minimum 2-week shutdown for a lot of teams, including Fordham's men's team. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out in terms of how the scheduling will be completely rearranged in terms of the out-of-conference schedule. What I am worried about is what will happen in conference play, because you have to imagine that there are going to be positive tests during the conference play starting in January. And that's when things will get a little dicey because you're probably going to have to reschedule some games if things get completely out of whack, especially if a team tests positive and they have to miss 2 weeks. That's 4 conference games for a lot of teams that they play in a span of 2 weeks, depending on when it happens. So there's going to have to be rescheduling of those games. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it could get ugly going forward. And I think the bubble was probably the best option for a lot of conferences going forward, and keeping the students away from campus would probably have been the best option. But at the same time, that's hard to make that happen, especially for college students who are taking classes and stuff like that. So I'm interested really to see how that plays out, because I think from an out-of-conference perspective, I think it's really interesting. And I think it's actually kind of cool how teams are now willing to play literally anyone. But when it comes to conference play, it could get ugly really fast, Nick.
Everything that we know about this virus tells us that it's made more difficult when stuff is held inside. And that, I think, is the most concerning part about all of this, in that you are more likely to have larger issues because the spread can happen more easily with the way that college basketball and basketball in general is held. I'm interested to see how this thing happens going forward, because I'm sitting here and wondering whether it can happen without a bubble, especially when you're considering some of the travel and the restrictions that are going to be put on going forward as cases spike in certain places. So we talk about this all the time, but New York State, right? You have to quarantine if you're going to a spiking state elsewhere in the country. And where does that leave you, and what does that look like? I don't know that it's so far-fetched that you could have a game scheduled somewhere where your team, regardless of whether you have a positive test or not, if you had to travel to that location and then come back to your campus without an exemption, you're supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks. And what is that going to look like? So there are so many logistical things that I don't know that everybody has ironed out as of yet. And hopefully they'll get an understanding of what's going to happen going forward. But that's my main concern. And you're just wondering how viable this season is, and you're hoping that it can continue, because we love college basketball. We love watching it, and we really want it to come back. And I think that there are smart and safe ways to get this thing done. Right now, I think that they're doing the best job that they can, and that's just across the board with some of the tournaments that have been held and the programs, and managing and trying to be as smart and safe about this as possible. I think that what you mentioned was a really good point, Jackson, in that teams are more willing to think outside the box and schedule games on short notice and play teams maybe that they otherwise would not. You're really focusing on the local schedule and scheduling teams that you just want to get as many games in as possible. So I think that adds a level of excitement to it. You're just hopeful that the cases don't continue to rise and that some of those logistical issues don't get in the way of the sport that we're so excited about a return and that we love so much.
And also part of that is that you know that when the tournament comes around, it's going to have to be in a bubble. There's just no way to accomplish that without one. And for me, I think that the sooner you can get to a bubble, if you're the NCAA, the more viable this season will be, and finishing this season will be. Because you're at a point right now where, I mean, if you just scroll through ESPN and scroll through like scores, you get to a point where like there's at least 10 games every day that are getting canceled. And we're just starting the season right now. Like we're literally within the first 3 days of college basketball season. And we have had, I mean, probably 50 plus games canceled already. as we are recording this right now. So that's a major concern going forward is, can we get to a point in conference play where we are playing almost every game? And I just don't know if that's viable right now without a bubble. And that would be the biggest concern if I'm the NCAA, because you just can't really – it's really going to be hard to seed teams who have only played 12 conference games when you're expected to play 18. And if that's the case for a lot of these teams, then it's going to be really ugly. So I think that you need to find a way to go to the bubble. It then doesn't have to be for the entirety of conference play, but if the Big Ten says, hey, for a month, we want a bubble in Indianapolis where we want to play, you can play 10 games in a matter of a month if you really wanted to, even more if you had to. That should be a route that the NCAA looks to take. And I don't think they'll do that, and I don't really think that's realistic at this point, but I think it's an option they have to pursue.
I would disagree with you in saying that it's realistic, because here's the thing. When you think about the end of the college basketball season, where does it end in conference play? It's a conference tournament. So when you get to the conference tournament, that's going to operate as a bubble anyway. Every team is going to be in this one central location, and all the protocols are going to be followed because that's what you need to pull this thing off. So what is the difference between, okay, our conference tournament is set for this date, teams are going to show up 3 weeks early? That's the whole thing. So depending on the gym or the place that it is, or wherever it's supposed to take place, and I guess I'm thinking about this from an A10 perspective as opposed to.
It appears we have lost the fallen Nick DeLuca again. When will he return? And we still don't have him. But I get what he is saying. Just to counter his point until he comes back, I think that starting a bubble 3 weeks prior to a conference tournament, I'm not entirely saying that's not realistic, but what I am saying is that I think that if you are going to keep college kids in a bubble for that long, I just don't think that's possible. I really don't. And Thomas, we'll get to your next headline in a sec, but I just don't think that with kids taking classes, and I get the NCAA really. Listen, we could say they care about classes. They don't really give a crap about what classes these kids are taking. They just care about the money that they funnel in terms of revenue. But I don't think that you can realistically get a university to commit to this and say, hey, we're going to put these guys in a bubble for a month and play college basketball, because that's unfortunately not what it's about. So once again, we've lost Nick DeLuca for a little bit. I cannot wait to hear the excuse he brings onto the air when we come back. But Quiggs, let's shift to our next headline.
All right, so more COVID-19 headlines. The Ravens-Steelers primetime Thanksgiving was postponed to Tuesday due to positive COVID-19 tests at Baltimore's facility, including quarterback Lamar Jackson. Do you think that the Ravens can hand their division rivals their first loss of the season without their star QB?
No shot. There's no way. This Steelers team is really damn good. And what they do on the defensive side of the football is extremely impressive, because you have two of the best pass rushers in the NFL in TJ Watt and Bud Dupree, who are excellent in every single regard. So I think you put a new quarterback in there who's not Lamar Jackson, and if you look at their roster right now, it's likely going to be RG3, who we haven't seen in a long time, unless you think they're going to put Trace McSorley. And I think if you think that, you're a little bit crazy. But I don't think that that's the direction that the Ravens are going to go in. And let's be honest, this Ravens team hasn't looked very good recently. I mean, you look at the slate of losses they've had over the past few weeks. Titans on the road in overtime, they didn't look all that good. They lose in a absolute disaster class in terms of performance and weather to the Pats on Sunday Night Football in what was a monsoon in Foxborough. They lose at the buzzer essentially to the Steelers on the last play where they can't score a touchdown. And they just haven't impressed me all that much lately. They had a win on the road against Indianapolis, which is a good win because the Colts look like one of the best teams in the AFC right now. But Quiggs, I want to get your opinion on this too. I just don't see the Ravens. I don't see the Ravens beating this team even with Lamar Jackson because I don't think this team has looked good with him in the lineup already.
No, I mean, without Lamar Jackson, they do not have an offense. He's the key to their offense. They lead the league in rushing per game, but Lamar Jackson makes up almost half of that. So you can't expect RG3 to come in and have anywhere similar to that effect on the team. Meanwhile, the Steelers, they're undefeated. They have a fantastic defense. And to think that RG3 could come into this game and lead the Ravens to victory would make for great TV, but it's very unlikely to happen.
I don't think the Ravens are a playoff team, personally. I look at the AFC right now, and I see 6 teams that are better than them at the moment. Because to me, listen, we can talk about Lamar Jackson. We can talk about this Ravens offense all we want. The biggest thing to me about the Ravens coming into this season was I thought their defense was going to be a massive strength for them because I think you look at personnel-wise, they have arguably the best secondary in the entire NFL with Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith. That's a loaded group, and there's no real other way to put it right there. But this defense has been giving up some points lately, and they haven't looked good against some not great offenses. Let's go back to that Sunday night game against New England where it was a monsoon the entire time. And listen, the Ravens were supposed to be able to stop the run. They couldn't. And Cam Newton was making plays with his arm. Heck, I forget who's the one that made the throw. Some wide receiver made a throw on Sunday night that game that was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable play. But the point is this Ravens defense just simply hasn't looked very good, on top of the fact that offensively, Lamar Jackson has clearly taken a step back this year. I think Greg Roman as a play caller has taken a step back. And I don't know if this team ends up in a playoff spot. It's 6-4 right now. With the schedule left that they have to play, I don't see this team ending up in a playoff spot. I really don't.
They're in a tough spot right now. I apologize for dropping out on there for you guys for a second there, but I'm back. I'm just like MJ wearing the 4-5. So the thing for me is that Baltimore is in a difficult position in that division, which is so good. We just got done talking about how it was so hard for the NFC East because of the schedule that they have to play in the NFC West and the AFC North. That's a really good division. And again, we talked about this with San Francisco, but it's the same sentiment with Cincinnati. Depending on when you catch Cincinnati with Joe Burrow or now whatever it's going to be, Brandon Allen or Finley, that can be an easier or more difficult win based upon the scheduling and when you play them. For me, it's about their offense, and it's Lamar Jackson taking a step back in conjunction with what they have failed to do in building an offense around him. He has not developed into this phenomenal passer. At the same time, he can do enough to be a successful quarterback in being an NFL passer, but they don't have any weapons in terms of wide receivers. There's nothing there. And that to me is the biggest issue. You knew that their running game was going to regress because they don't have the same people available to them right now with Marshall Yanda retiring and Ronnie Stanley. They sustain a season-ending injury to an all-pro tackle, and they're in a really difficult spot. And now it's about stacking the box for defenses and making Lamar beat you through the air. And it's a twofold thing. Lamar is not playing as well as you'd expect for a guy who won an MVP in throwing the football, but also who is he throwing to? Marquise Brown, who put up no catches for no yards last week, is their number one receiver. And now he's talking about throwing to Willie Snead IV or Des Bryant, who was last seen in the NFL in 2017. That's what Lamar Jackson has to work with right now, and there's just nothing there. That's no disrespect to their tight end game. I like Mark Andrews on that offense, but man, oh man, is there just not a lot to work with. And with the way they run their offense, it's ground and pound. It is you are going to run the football. And they were in a great situation last year where they didn't have to play from behind and they could run the game script that they wanted to run. When this team is not out in front, it is difficult, and it's in part on the quarterback and in part on there just not being a lot around him.
First off, Nick, we're glad to have you back. We missed you for a few minutes there, and we were all a little sad to see you go for a moment. And I was excited to hear the excuse you brought back for leaving me all by myself here with Quiggs. But anyways, we are glad to have you back, even though we lost you for a moment. But
You didn't want to hang out with Quiggs?
oh no, I did. Trust me. We
I'm a
got
good
some
time.
nice alone time over here, but
Right.
I was a little offended to see you leave me.
Well, I'm
The way
sorry.
you did. But we're glad to have you back. And anyways, yeah. Also, on top of the wide receiver game being an issue, no J.K. Dobbins this weekend. No Mark Andrews, I should say Tuesday. So it's going to be all aboard the Gus bus and RG3. That is the running game now for the Ravens against the undefeated Steelers. So that's how bad it's gotten for Baltimore on offense in terms of COVID and all of that. But let's move on to our last headline before we officially move on.
Yes. So Vanderbilt's Sarah Fuller, the goalkeeper for the women's soccer team, will make history as the first woman to suit up for a Power 5 conference football team on Saturday. She's rostered as a place kicker for Vandy's game against Missouri, filling in for the team that's been limited by quarantine mandates. What do you think this moment means for women in sports? And do you see a future in which women playing football at the elite level becomes more common?
I think it's incredible. I think it's really cool that you can get a female involved in the most physical sport that there is out there in the NFL, and not the NFL, in football. And I absolutely think that there's a ceiling where we could see a female kicker in the NFL at some point. I think that if football has shown us anything, and Nick, you touched on this before the show, if you're good enough to play, you're going to get a chance. And Fuller clearly is good enough, and I hope that we see her get an opportunity to kick in this game, because I didn't read too much into it, but you would have to think, given everything that's happened, that she is the number one kicker right now on this team, because they literally don't have anyone else. So I think it's an awesome opportunity. I think it's great for women in sports going forward, and I think that absolutely, if she's good enough to be a kicker and wants to pursue the NFL, there would definitely be teams that would take a shot on her. And I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case for anyone talented enough going forward.
I think that's the overarching theme with all of this, in that if you're good enough, the football minds that be, whether it be in college football or in the NFL, are going to give you a shot, because it's all about winning and all about doing what it takes to be successful to win. And if that means that if you're a female and you can help us win, we're all for it. That's the great thing to me about football, is it brings people together in that way, that it doesn't matter where you come from or what background that you may have or what you believe or whatever differentiates you from somebody else. It's all about working towards one common goal. And I think that this just sort of opens the door again, and just seeing some of the things that we have in the last couple of months in progress, and still with the knowledge that there is a long way to go in being more inclusive and understanding about how that operates, especially in a football context. But yeah, I absolutely can see this as something that we will see going forward, because it's always been that way. If there is a female or a woman who can help a football team win, whether that's playing the game, whether that's being a kicker or coaching, we've seen that more recently too. NFL teams, college football teams are going to jump all over that, because they'll do whatever it takes to win.
I hope she shoves today too. I hope she goes out there and makes a 51-yard field goal at some point and wins the game for Vanderbilt in some capacity. And I know I'm rooting for her. I hope that she gets every opportunity that she deserves, because it's pretty damn cool to see something like this happen. And I think it's a transcendent day for sports and for college sports and for females in sports going forward. So to answer the overarching question, yes, I absolutely think that this is a big day, and I absolutely think that women will get an opportunity if they are good enough going forward and want to pursue that path if the NFL says, hey, we need a kicker and she's the best one available, an NFL team should absolutely take a shot on her without question. So that's our first headline segment. Once again, we'll bring Quiggs in at the top of the next hour for our second headline segment. So that'll wrap it up. Approaching 12:30 here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Heil and DeLuca bringing you to 2 o'clock here on 90.7 FM and Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So stick with us. College football, we got a lot to talk about. And Notre Dame with a big win yesterday over North Carolina. Did they solidify themselves a playoff spot? Yeah, we'll answer that question in just a moment. Coming up here on One.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Alrighty, just past 12:30 here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Jackson Heil, Nick DeLuca here with you. Thomas Quigley, our headline man. Shout out to Alex Woles for keeping us on the air. We've had some technical glitches today, particularly with Nick. Just his inability to stay on the air is a little concerning, to say the least. But we're moving along. We're motoring. A report in from Adam Schefter right now. Apparently another coach and another player has tested positive in Pittsburgh with multiple contacts. So that's something to monitor going forward, as that game was scheduled for Tuesday. We'll see if that gets pushed back even further now, but it's looking like a disaster between the Steelers and the Ravens right now. But we did just talk about Baltimore. Let's talk about some college football, because quite an interesting Friday. Nick, every time I watch college football on a Friday after Thanksgiving, it always feels like it always makes Saturday feel like Sunday, but it's a little more glorious when you wake up on that Saturday and realize, oh, the weekend literally just started. So that's always a positive.
It's one of those best days in all of college football,
True.
Football Friday after Thanksgiving. I'm always been a huge fan of it, and we got a couple of really good games in Iowa State and Texas, and then UNC and Notre Dame. And I was glued to my television watching both of those games. And it was just really a fun time watching them, because, as you know, I'm a huge fan of college football. I really like to pay attention to it. And it was so much fun. And especially in this crazy, wacky, shortened season, there's so much on the line so quickly. There's so much on the line in that game between Notre Dame and UNC, where, as ridiculous as it sounds, Notre Dame could kind of lose almost everything with a loss there to a UNC team that's really good. As much goodwill as Notre Dame has built up with a win over Clemson, if they were to have lost that game to North Carolina and then turn around and lose what is going to amount to be a really tough game against Clemson a second time, I don't think they're in the playoffs. So it's just really cool to see so much at stake so early, and then to see the high level of college football that we saw yesterday was really cool.
Well, let's focus on that Notre Dame North Carolina game yesterday. And what was really interesting to me is that, I mean, the start of the game, I mean, you think it's going to be a shootout. It's 14-14 after the first 4 possessions. And North Carolina's offense looked unstoppable against a really good Notre Dame defense nonetheless. But they only get 3 points the rest of the way, a field goal at the end of the first half. They completely shut down the run game of North Carolina, which has been huge for Mac Brown since coming over to the Tar Heels. And really, the formula to beat North Carolina has been, if you shut down their run game, you will find a way to win. And every time they've been outrushed this year, they have lost. And happened against Virginia. It now happened again against Notre Dame. And I think this win for me, for Notre Dame, Nick, and you could tell me if you feel the same way, this is a program not changing win, but this tells me that this Notre Dame team is different from what this program usually puts out. Because this is a game in years past. You just look at the past 10 years of Notre Dame football, even maybe further than that. This is a game that Notre Dame finds a way to lose and finds a way to put themselves in jeopardy of the playoff conversation. Not only because it's a game they should win, but it's a ranked team on the road that they should beat given the talent they have, but they usually will find a way to make it close and find a way to lose. But and that's been kind of the story of Brian Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame. So, and his time in South Bend has been enamored by that. But the fact that they not only come out and win, but come out after giving up back-to-back touchdowns on the first 2 possessions, dominate on the defensive side of the ball. And then the run game of Notre Dame was just absolutely fantastic all game long, in addition to the fact that their offensive line was terrific. This just felt like a game that Notre Dame, from the start, was going to lose and find a way to put themselves in hot water. But they got the job done. And I've doubted Notre Dame all year, personally, and probably shouldn't have. But, I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of Ian Book. He's grown on me a lot this year. I think he's made some big plays in some big spots that I haven't seen him do in years past. The defense is terrific. The offensive line is really good. this team has proved me wrong time and time again, and I'm finally starting to creep onto the Notre Dame train.
They have certainly been one of the best teams in college football all year and have proven people wrong along the way. I certainly did not expect them to beat Clemson, and credit to them for doing that. That said, the program won't change until they win a college football playoff game.
For sure.
And I'm not saying they have to win the college football playoff national championship. They could win a semifinal game and then, lose in the final, and you're still saying, okay, this was a really successful season, because Notre Dame football has not reached those heights in a long time. North Carolina isn't the end game for Notre Dame, though. They've won some big games in the regular season. It all comes down to me to the playoff, because that's been the narrative for me on Notre Dame. And if anything, it's the program-changing win when they beat Clemson. Although to me, that one comes with an asterisk again, because Trevor Lawrence and some of the defensive pieces that they were missing, it'll be a program-changing win if they were to beat them in the ACC championship game, which they might. But to me, I don't know that I ever expected Notre Dame to lose this game. I thought there was a possibility, because I do think highly of North Carolina, and I think Mac Brown does an excellent job with that program. So you knew they were going to be a team that was ready to play, come in and give Notre Dame their best shot. They were at home, and they weren't going to get terribly outcoached, right? You know that Mac Brown is going to have his team ready to go with a talent equal, and it was going to amount to being a good game. But Notre Dame just had too much talent, and that's what this game came down to. Ian Book made too many plays. That offensive line was really able to get some traction and lead the way for Notre Dame doing what they want to do and running the football. To me, it's going to come down to when Ian Book has to play from behind, when he is forced to win a game from behind and win the game with his arm. That's where the true test is going to come for Notre Dame. I'm not going as far as to say this is a program-changing win. It was a nice win. It was one that they had to have to sort of ensure that they would be in the college football playoff, which is not somewhere where they've been routinely the last few years, which is a big thing for them. But to me, the next step for Brian Kelly to validate everything that has happened this season, you got to win a game in the playoff. Until you do that, your program is still on the same level.
That's fair. I don't entirely disagree with that. And I think program changing was maybe a bit of a stretch, but I think that one of the big things of the Brian Kelly era, for me at least, is that they've been close, and they've been close to getting there, and they've had their opportunities to do so. They haven't been able to get it done. Yes, they had the one year where they went to the college football playoff, but they got their doors blown off in that game. But to me, you got to get there first. And to me, if they – I mean, obviously, if they lose to North Carolina, I think that they're not getting into the playoff. And that for obvious reasons, of course. That would also assume they lose to Clemson in the ACC championship game. But I think that if you look at this team and you look at Notre Dame and you look at their past, I think 5 years ago they probably lose this game under Brian Kelly. But that wasn't the case this year. And this was the game that told me that this is a different Notre Dame team than they've had in years past. And you could talk about the winning big games argument, and that's certainly one to make because they haven't really won a ton of big games, and beating Clemson at home was that big game. But this was just as big a game to me because I think that, listen, even if they lose to Clemson that first time around, they're still going to get to the AFC championship. Not the AFC championship game, the ACC championship game.
I'd be impressed if they got to the AFC championship game.
Listen, they might have a better shot than the Jets at doing that.
That's fair. That's fair.
But if they get to the ACC championship game, they were going to have another shot at Clemson to beat them. To me, it was avoid the big loss that would put a real spoil on their resume. And losing to North Carolina, as good as they are, and it being on the road, that would have been the one that did it to them. And Nick, can you foresee a scenario where they're left out of the playoff now at this point? Because even if they're blown out against Notre Dame, I'm having a lot of trouble leaving them off as one of the best four teams in the country right now.
Well, it all comes down to, are you asking about Clemson or Notre Dame?
Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, Notre Dame I think is going to be in. There's no way, unless they were to somehow egregiously lose a game on the rest of their schedule. That doesn't seem very likely to me. just because Notre Dame's a good football team. And
Mhm.
it's so difficult to categorize. And we have, and I know that you've been a part of this too on College Football Gridiron at times. And Jimmy and I go back and forth about what the heck is the criteria for the College Football Playoff Committee?
Yep.
Like what constitutes the whole thing? Because you sit there and you say, and you look at sort of the rankings, I think that Notre Dame and Clemson is perhaps not the best example. Maybe I will go with Ohio State, right? Ohio State, I think, is more deserving to be, sorry, Clemson is the better team than Ohio State right now. Yet they have one loss, and you're trying to figure out where things rank. Like, what is the difference between the team that is most deserving versus finishing the eye test or the better team? I should probably backtrack and say the best example of this is really where we see things unfold in the back end of the playoff or some of the teams that are not in there, right? For example, BYU, like they are the most accomplished. They're 9-0. They're doing a great job and playing good football, but they are not what you would consider one of the best teams because they haven't played that same strength of schedule. And that's why they put even a team like Georgia, who I don't think is as good or is comparable to what BYU has done this year. But their two losses come to two really good programs in Alabama and Florida. So it's such a balancing act. And I don't want that to take away from the season that Notre Dame has had and you're trying to figure out all that stuff. They'll be in and it will be up to them. They're going to have to figure out and find a way how to show up on that big stage. And that's the big question to me at this point. And you don't want to talk bad about them because they have certainly earned the praise that they have gotten. But the reality is the reality, and that the expectations for Notre Dame right now are sort of like, okay, we'll be pretty good in the regular season. And if we can sneak into the playoff, that's great. That won't change without a competitive win in the college football playoff. And that's not something that they have pulled off yet. And look, they're playing in the ACC right now. And I know that Clemson has ruled this league for a long time, and they are one of the best teams in college football. And outside of that, there's not much there. And again, this is not to diminish what Notre Dame has accomplished, but at the same time, who have they played other than Clemson? And yes, the North Carolina win is good, but North Carolina is a program that Notre Dame should be beating. So it's just hard to categorize with all the changes. Normally, this is not something that we have to go after Notre Dame for, right? The strength of schedule. Sorry, they're playing USC. They're playing all these difficult games with their out of conference stuff. Usually they're playing Michigan, right? So and not this year. That would have been an easier win than certainly playing North Carolina, but just difficult to figure out and sift through all this stuff. I like Notre Dame, but it's only going to change in the playoff. But they're in for sure.
Highland DeLuca, 1245 here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, coming to you on 90.7 WFUV. Our YouTube page, our Facebook Live. Thank you to all our viewers and all our listeners who have taken the time to tune in today. Apologies for our technical glitches today with some Wi-Fi, but glad you're sticking with us and continuing along with college football. And I think you brought up the interesting point about Ohio State and the level of deserving that they are, because they had another game canceled this week. Ryan Day, their head coach, testing positive for COVID-19. Their game against Illinois was supposed to be on Saturday today, and it has been canceled. That's where things get a little dicey for me, because if Ohio State's only able to play, 6 or 7 games this year before getting to the playoff, like, how do you assess that? That's the toughest thing for me, because their best game on their schedule right now has been Indiana, and they got taken a little bit they were up by 21 in the fourth quarter, but they only ended up winning by 7. Indiana had the ball with a chance to tie the game at the end, albeit a slim one. But how do you assess Ohio State? That's the biggest question that everyone's trying to figure out, because you got two teams right outside in Florida and Texas A&M in the SEC, who are one-loss teams who all have looked really good. And if one of them wins the SEC championship, how are you going to leave them out at this rate? What about BYU, like you mentioned, who's undefeated, although hasn't played anyone at 9-0? Cincinnati, for that matter, is still unbeaten right now, even though they got taken for a close one last weekend against UCF. So it's almost impossible for the committee. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for the committee usually, because I think there are a lot of biases when it comes to determining who ends up in the college football playoff. This would be the one year where I have sympathy for them, because just as a fan of not anyone in particular by any means, I have no clue how to assess the college football playoff and how to assess the 4 best teams, because you have Clemson, you have Notre Dame, you have Alabama. Those 3 are essentially locks to get in, and they have all shown it with the resume for the most part, assuming Clemson wins the ACC championship game. If they don't, that's where things get even more interesting. But can you really let an Ohio State team that won 6 or 7 games in the college football playoff? I don't know. And that's the question that everyone seems to have to figure out. And I think they're one of the best 4 teams in the country. Heck, I think they might be one of the best 2 teams in the country. Was it really fair to let them in when half their Big Ten schedule gets canceled and they don't really play anyone? I don't know. I really don't.
It's difficult to decipher, right? And that's why I was an advocate at the beginning of the season for this year. And I know it's generally a gateway. We talk about this with the Major League Baseball playoffs, in that we expanded them for the shortened season, and it's here to stay. And the NFL is expanding the playoffs this year, and that was even before COVID. They might do it to 8 if there's a game canceled. And guess what? I'm guessing if it goes to 8, it's going to stay at 8. They won't get rid of playoff games. But they should have expanded it to 8 playoff teams this year. Mm-hmm. They should have. That's the reality of the situation, because it's so difficult to figure this thing out when you've got teams playing different numbers of games. There is outcry when everyone's on a level playing field, playing the 12-game regular season with a conference championship and who's in and who's out and all this stuff. Now we've got the Pac-12 playing 3 games. We've got some teams in the Big Ten playing 6 or 7. We've got Wisconsin, who had a bunch of games canceled, and I know that they lost. But if Wisconsin was, say, undefeated, how do you categorize them? Yeah. They're what? They're 2-1 right now.
2-1 with another game canceled this weekend. It's ridiculous.
So how the heck? If Wisconsin were 3-0 right now, if they had beaten Northwestern, where the heck do they sit in this whole thing? And fortunately for the committee, they don't have to figure it out. But I think that's the best example. That's a team that's a blue blood program that has been really good for a long time, would have a quality win over Northwestern. Again, they didn't get it. But what the heck do you do with them?
Like, I would even flip it the other direction too. Look at Northwestern. They're a team that you have to take into prime example here, because they're number 8 in the country. They have beaten Wisconsin at home. Their defense looks like one of the best in the entire nation. If they beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, presumably with 7 or 8 games under their belt, how do you leave them out?
Oh, they're in if they beat Ohio State, and that's what it's going to be. I think it's going to be, and there was talk about this again with a potential 8-team playoff, and it being more like the NFL, and that if you win your division, you're in. Mm-hmm. If you are a winner of the SEC, you're going to be in. If you win the ACC, you're going to be in. If you win the Big Ten, you're going to be in. Pac-12 is a little bit more dicey, because I don't think that they have the same sort of group to run out there. And then you're sort of looking at a potential wild card. What does the sort of 4th type of thing look like? But that's to me what it is. If you win your conference, I think you're going to get in, with a potential notable exception where if a 2-loss team were able to get to the playoff or something like that, then maybe you reconsider. But to me, if you win the conference, the winner of the Big Ten, unless it's somehow, something unforeseen, that they're getting in. That's what it's going to be.
It's just wild. It really is. And it's a tire fire completely, because of the Big Ten starting late and them having pretty much the biggest COVID problem of any conference, and it being arguably the most influential conference right now, because that is the 4th spot in the playoff right now, is really whoever wins the Big Ten. And then if Ohio State doesn't play enough games and say Florida or Texas A&M wins the SEC, that gets weird, because do you let no 1-loss Alabama? Probably, but I don't know. It's tough to say at this point, and it's tough to see the direction that things will go. You mentioned another game that happened this weekend in Texas and Iowa State. And we've talked about Texas being back for a long time. They've never really been back, but a few people considered them back. But really, since the coaching change, where Texas went from Mac Brown to Tom Herman when they got him from Houston, it seemed like for a lot of years people were giving him a long leash, and deservingly so. You give a guy with a really good track record at Houston, you got to give him some time at a program like Texas that was trending in the wrong direction under Mac Brown. And I think Mac Brown did a terrific job at Texas, and I think that for the large part, other than his really last year there, he did an awesome job with the Longhorns. Are we at the fire Tom Herman point yet? Because I think we are, and I think we should be. But have we reached that point yet, Nick DeLuca?
Yes. And the only thing that would save his job, in the same way that we talk about Jim Harbaugh, although I don't think the Texas situation is as bad because he had more to rebuild, is if Texas is in financial peril in the way that they cannot afford to eat a remaining salary for him and his coaching staff and then find a viable replacement for him. You can't be at Texas and not compete for the Big 12 championship and not beat Oklahoma. And they haven't done that consistently. And Oklahoma still runs that conference, and Lincoln Riley is the best coach there. And they're going to have a difficult time winning that Red River rivalry, although they have won those games at times. But on the whole, consistency has not been there for Tom Herman, and it's time to move on. They're just not enough in the conversation for winning the Big 12 where Texas is accustomed to being. And that, to me, is the difference. You can't continue to run out the team that they have run out with a now 4-year starting quarterback in Sam Ehlinger and not play in the Big 12 championship game. It's insanity to me. I think they have a good enough team, and there have been things that have sort of been off and on, whether it be the defense one week or the offense isn't playing as well another week or whatever it is. But at some level, it's he's out of time, Tom Herman. He hasn't turned it around. Texas is a proud program. This is a program that has expectations of competing for the college football playoff, and that starts with winning your conference. Tom Herman hasn't come close, and when you don't come close, you don't stick around for much longer.
Where it gets interesting, though, is that the timing of everything is just really bad right now. Just to fire a head coach, because you already have the money limitations given what has happened with COVID-19. Those restrictions in itself are going to make it really difficult to fire a head coach. And this was the same conversation we had with Jim Harbaugh, because Harbaugh has a buyout, and it's a pretty significant one, because where do you go after that if you're Michigan, or in this case, Texas? Where do you go from here after having to spend all this money to fire your head coach and just get out of that contract? And then you got to pay a lot of money if you want to bring in another big-time coach. And that's where things get really interesting to me, because will they just bite the bullet and say, hey, we're going to fire someone here, accept the loss in money, but can we really go in the direction where we're looking to hire a big-time head coach for, say, I don't know, $8 million a year the next year? I don't know if a lot of teams are going to want to do that. And I don't know if a lot of big-time programs are going to be able to do that, no less, let alone want to do that, because the timing of it right now is really bad. And I don't know if ADs are going to be given the clearance by their budgetary people up top and say, hey, we can't afford to hire a new head coach right now. And we've seen that in other schools before this pandemic even happened. And not only in football, in basketball, it's a problem too. If you want to fire a head coach right now, good luck, because whoever you're bringing in to hire, you can't offer him a ton of money. You can't offer him more than 6 figures right now. That's where a lot of big time programs are at. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, because even in Texas situation, which is a high revenue football school, can you really afford to bite the bullet on $10+ million on a buyout for Tom Herman right now? Can Michigan do the same? I don't know. It's a question that needs to be asked.
It's going to be tough, and the decision making is going to come down to a number of people. At times, South Carolina was the first team to make a high-profile coaching change this year with Will Muschamp, and there were boosters who were so upset with what was going on there, they started fundraising to pay the buyout. They're like, we're done with this guy. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen at Michigan or in Texas, but it could, and depending on how certain people with influence feel, that can sway the decision-making one way or another. But at the end of the day, the results on the field haven't been there. And that's where Tom Herman is putting himself in massive jeopardy at the very least and at the very kindest. If we're talking about normal circumstances, he's not coming back. Of course, these aren't normal circumstances, as you rightly point out, Jackson. So it'll be interesting to see what Texas does going forward. I don't see it happening. And I think that Texas can figure out the money situation enough. And it's not friendly. He's under contract until 2023 is Tom Herman. So that's 3 years to eat, but it's just been such a difficult ride. He might get another year after this one. As you see, to 2023, that's a lot. So maybe the idea is with the finances, you might back off and say he could potentially get another year. But to me, this was in a while for Tom Herman. And if you're not going to let him continue all the way to his next recruiting class getting to be juniors and seniors and upperclassmen with the way that they let him grow with Sam Ehlinger and it didn't work out, I don't know what you're waiting for now other than you really don't feel like you have the right guy or the ability to get the right guy. It's a tough balancing act, but if I were a decision maker, again, I'm not paying the bill. It just seems to me like time has run out on Tom Herman at Texas.
12:58 here on FUV, Highland DeLuca, taking you on one-on-one till 2 a.m. Glad you could be with us as we close out hour number 2. Talking college football, it's going to be an interesting landscape to watch going down the stretch. Lots of games being canceled already today that we talked about, specifically Ohio State being one of them and Ryan Day's positive test. Certainly something to monitor going forward. As for some scores that we are currently live right now, not that they matter because they've already happened, you guys know them, but as we're doing this, Florida's tied 7-7 in the second quarter against Kentucky. Not a whole lot of other games going on right now. Indiana leading Maryland 7-0, but again, not that the scores matter much, but just to give you an idea of where we're at, where we are recording this, that is the landscape right now. So if there are big upsets later, we haven't gotten to them yet. But wrapping up our 12 o'clock hour, we'll do a quick station ID and we'll come back with Quigs in a little bit for some headlines on the NBA. We'll talk some college hoops, basketball, Rantsgiving. We're going to have a lot of fun in this final hour here on One-on-One. But let's take a quick break and let the station identify itself.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This on New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Running sports call-in show, officially in the 1 o'clock hour, the final hour of our show today. Highland DeLuca taking you till 2 a.m. here on One-on-One. And Nick, we're getting into some college basketball talk, and oh my God, that is a glorious thing to speak of because, man, it had been 8 months. I got to call a game last week with the wonderful Emmanuel Berbari, and first time I'd called a game in a gym in about 8 months, which was pretty awesome to be a part of. I know I'm excited to get back in it whenever Fordham's next games may be, but man, we got college hoops back. And I remember when things shut down remember the dates very specifically, March 12th, 2020. It was halftime of the Creighton St. John's game, the Big East tournament, and everything shut down. And it was a very sad day. It was the start of a long period without sports, but we're finally back and college hoops returns. And there's a lot to get to in terms of dissecting what will be a great college basketball season. But I think the opening takeaway I have to begin with is on the number one team in the country right now in the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And they look unstoppable. And it's only been 2 games, but they played Kansas in their opener on Thanksgiving, and they put up 102 points against the Jayhawks. First time in 30 years that's happened to Kansas. They come back the day later, put up 90-plus on Auburn to go with it. Nick, this is one of the best offensive teams in college basketball I've seen in a long, long time. And this is a team that lost 2 of their best bigs from a year ago in Philip Petrusev and Killian Tilly to go with it. And they still look like they're incredibly balanced. They can score at all levels. I mean, Drew Timme has looked terrific. Corey Kispert's awesome. But the guy I want to talk about who I was blown away by is Jalen Suggs, who is their freshman 5-star, only the second ever McDonald's All-American to ever go to Gonzaga following Zach Collins. This kid, who was a big-time football recruit as well, he was a dual-threat quarterback. He's 6'5". He's maybe the most athletic point guard I've ever seen in college basketball, the last one being Russell Westbrook. And this guy's bigger than Westbrook. He's just as explosive as Westbrook. He's got vision like Westbrook. He went for 24 and 8 against Marcus Garrett, who was the best defender in the country last year. And that's on top of all the weapons that they already have. I was blown away by how good Gonzaga is, and probably shouldn't have been, because you expected a team like Gonzaga with the talent they have to be really good. But Gonzaga is really good when they're ranked the number one team in the country. They don't get that type of respect normally from the national media, and they got it this year. And Nick, they showed why in those first 2 games.
For sure, and certainly excited to be talking about some college basketball with you, Jackson. It's been certainly a while, and I'm excited, just like you, to get back in the gym, and really hoping to be able to do that, because that's something that we've all missed for sure. And just that whole experience is one of the best. There's nothing that replaces that. So really excited to try and get that back. And as we break down Gonzaga, what else is there to say? I mean, they are unbelievable. And the only other thing that I want to add to that is just the credit to Mark Few that goes into all this stuff as the head coach of building up Gonzaga, because this is not a program that is born overnight, or a team that sort of just is a traditional powerhouse, although he has made them that since he has gotten there to Gonzaga. And I don't know that people really understand how difficult that is, right? Like, it's easy if you're Duke or you're Kansas, and yes, Coach K did the building all those years ago, and Bill Self at Kansas, and they've been just a traditional program. Villanova may be a better example, with Jay Wright as a guy who has really taken that program to the next level. But that doesn't happen in college basketball. You don't just get a coach who walks in there and, okay, now this team is really good and an entrenched powerhouse, because of how much recruiting has to do with college basketball in particular. If you get the right head coach in football, you can turn around a program based upon good recruiting, finding, that coaching can make the difference. And it maybe to a lesser degree can happen in college basketball as well, but it's so much harder to build and to become that top flight program the way that Gonzaga has. And then you see them getting these McDonald's All-Americans and maybe bucking the trend a little bit and trying to get some more experienced players at Gonzaga, but also mixing in some guys who are going to be really talented in the way that they have built this whole thing. So just a lot of credit to Mark Few, in addition to just how good Gonzaga looks on the floor, because you knew that they were going to come in and be prepared. That's the type of coach that Few is. and that they are well coached and that things were going to look good from the start, especially when you don't have the continuity and the benefit of working all off season in the way that the start of this season has been unceremonious and broken up and all the stuff that goes with it. So you knew they were going to be prepared, but to see the talent in their first few games to go with that preparation, that's why Gonzaga is the best team in the country and a team that we need to take seriously going forward as someone that could win a college basketball national championship.
College football still on the mind, always on the mind of Nick DeLuca, of course. But I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that they are by far the favorites to win it all. And honestly, the crazy thing to me about the Kansas game was I was actually impressed with Kansas. And they still gave up 102 points to Gonzaga. Like, Kansas was a lot deeper than I thought. They're really athletic, and they can score with the best of them, too. I mean, they put up 90-plus points in back-to-back games to start the year. And Marcus Garrett, who was the National Defensive Player of the Year last year, looks like he's taken a next step offensively as a senior now for the Jayhawks. But I was impressed by Kansas, and they still didn't even look like they were even close to the same tier as what this Gonzaga team is. So they're incredibly deep. They're only going to get better as this year goes along, as they incorporate Suggs more into the offense as a freshman point guard. As he gets more comfortable there, they're going to be really good. So that's going to be interesting to watch. In terms of other things to note from the opening weekend, which still isn't done, by the way, of course, but Virginia goes down yesterday to San Francisco, which I thought was a really interesting game because you have a team in San Francisco with a 35-year-old head coach in Todd Golden, who I think, by the way, is going to get a very big-time job soon. He's a guy who really embraces analytics. They love to shoot threes. They took a ton against Virginia, and they made 13 threes against the Cavaliers, which you just don't see Virginia doing very much ever. Even giving up 61 points is a lot for them, which San Francisco is able to do. Virginia, I'm not worried about because this just happens to Virginia. They're going to lose a game here and there where if a team shoots the ball well, it happens. But I like how this Virginia team is built. I think Sam Hauser, who had a tough start, especially against San Francisco, he had a really good look to win the game, but couldn't end up making it. I'm not too worried about Virginia. I just think that San Francisco is a lot better than people are going to give them credit for. And even though they lost to UMass Lowell on their first game of the year, I think the biggest takeaway I can say about the opening weekend is be patient with teams because, Nick, like you mentioned, not a precedented preseason by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of teams are shedding off rust. I know from watching Seton Hall yesterday play Louisville that was a team that hadn't played really in 2 weeks and then had to play a game yesterday on the road against Louisville, and they lose by 1 after they lose Bryce Aiken, who is their starting point guard. Their guys are in foul trouble. Like, you can't take away a ton from these opening games, and you have to be patient because a lot of these are warm-ups because there's no real scrimmages in the preseason. As someone who's a scout player for the women's basketball team, the closest they're getting to scrimmaging other teams is playing people like me who are washed up high school athletes who just go out there and want to play sometime. That's the closest you're getting to a scrimmage at this point. And on the men's side, you're getting intra-squad scrimmages at this point. And that's the closest thing you're getting to live action. So I think the biggest thing I can say for college basketball fans is if your team is losing early on, don't panic. It's going to take time. It's going to take a few weeks. And what really matters this year specifically, even more than in years past, is how do you perform in conference play once you've had 6 or 8 games under your belt and once you finally have gotten accustomed to what this college basketball season is going to look like.
Sure, and I'll even take it one step farther, and that's how are you progressing towards the tournament and the conference tournament and then the NCAA tournament, because it's really not about the regular season. If you can have a good enough regular season, and certainly there's no scenario in which a team like Virginia is not in, the NCAA tournament, the 64 team field in March. That's not going to happen. So how are they progressing towards the end of the ACC tournament, and how are they looking going forward into the college basketball March Madness, and how does that look? some variability here, as you mentioned, and that's what makes college basketball so much fun. Like, San Francisco shoots nearly 50% from three, and that's a huge reason against a Virginia team that we know wants to play a lot of defense, but isn't going to shoot the lights out against you. So when they're able to hit the threes, when the shots are falling, it makes Virginia vulnerable, and it's a big upset that we like to talk about. So it's always something that's really just exciting in that dynamic of college basketball, that just like we were talking about the NFL and college football, that it's any given Saturday or Sunday, it's any given whatever day you're playing the game on in college basketball. You live by the three, you die by the three, and San Francisco lived by the three against Virginia, and that was interesting to watch. But I totally second what you said on not panicking because of the brokenness of this offseason. It's just so hard to get the traction, and it's so hard to simulate, especially with some of the protocols. You don't want to have your team necessarily practicing all the time with each other. And I know that you probably have a better window into this than even I would, but it's not like you want to scrimmage all the time, because you have to make sure that you're taking the necessary safety protocols to also make sure that everything is going on, because you know what's worse than not practicing the way that you want? Getting the game canceled because someone got COVID. So there are just so many things that go into all this stuff of, okay, we're not preparing the way we want to. We're not preparing in a traditional way. We're not having enough time to prepare. So certainly patience needs to be exercised with all these college basketball programs in the early going. But that's also what makes it fun, because you get a San Francisco that can beat a Virginia.
Certainly does. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that. We just haven't seen a lot of it because a lot of the big time games have been canceled as well. So it's certainly something to monitor going forward. Let's shift over to the A10 before we wrap up our college hoops segment, because I want to do a little preview here of what's to come for Fordham potentially. And I think the biggest thing I can say about the Atlantic 10 this year is that I think it's a lot stronger than last year, even though last year you had Dayton at the top and who was arguably the best team in the entire country a year ago. You don't have that type of team this year where you're going to have a dominant force throughout the entire conference, but I think that the A10 is a lot deeper than it was a year ago, and you have a bunch of teams at the top of the fold that are going to beat each other up a little bit. I personally think Richmond is the best team in the conference. They were picked preseason to win it. They have 4 balanced scores. I mean, Gilliard, Grant Golden, you have KO as well. They have a lot of guys who can score, including Blake Francis, to go with that. St. Louis is going to be really good. They have a tough test today against LSU, which hasn't happened yet as of this recording, but it'll be interesting to see how they fare against them. I mean, 2 of the best guards in the nation in Jordan Goodwin and Javonte Perkins, 2 guys who will get a 10 Player of the Year consideration and All-American consideration for that matter. And even though Dayton lost Obi Toppin, their backcourt's terrific. I mean, Jalen Crutcher was arguably the best guard in the Atlantic 10 last year. I will say about the A10 also is that some of the best guards in the entire nation are in this conference. I mean, you go down the list of Gilliard, Perkins, Goodwin, Fats Russell at URI, who was terrific last year. There's a lot of guys who can play, and maybe the best player in this conference isn't even a guard, and that's Trey Mitchell on UMass, who took a big step forward last year. So I think the biggest difference about this conference this year than last year is that the depth at the top is a lot better than it was last year. And I think Richmond's a top 20 team. I think St. Louis is going to be in the top 25 at some point soon. I think URI can play. They've lost their first 2 games at the hands of Arizona State and BC, who looked really good and gave Nova a run for their money. But I think URI is going to be a really tough team to play in this conference. And I think as a whole, I think it's going to be a lot of really good games this year in the Atlantic 10. And there's going to be a lot of tough games as well, because usually going on the road is really difficult. Without fans, it's obviously a little different this year, but with the level of play at the top of this conference, it's going to be a lot more difficult to win games this year than it was a year ago. For sure.
And I think that it's funny because the popular thought is that Dayton last year was Obi Toppin and that was it. Mm-hmm. And that was just absolutely not the case. And they're a team that can certainly contend. I really like St. Louis, though, because I think that they're just so experienced. And you touched on so, the number of players that they have. I would add Hassan French into that
Correct.
as well, as a guy who's going to really lead them this year. But that's just a team top to bottom that you feel like they're returning almost every player of consequence from them last year. And in this broken season, that to me is a big deal with the continuity and having players who have played together and know what's expected in sort of that program. I think that's going to be a big advantage, but also not to diminish. I think Dayton is right there as well. And Richmond, as you mentioned as well. I really like what Dayton does. And I think Anthony Grant is one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the conference, and what he did to develop and help develop Obi Toppin. And is Dayton going to walk away with another player who's on that level because Anthony Grant keeps churning them out? Who the heck knows? So I agree with in second everything that you said about the depth being just so much greater at the top, and that's going to make it a huge challenge for Fordham going forward. And we talk about this and how difficult that this A10 conference has become at the top, and there are some really good programs here. And you're talking about, okay, well, St. Louis can be in the top 25, and Richmond and Dayton, and there's 3 in the A10. So that's a really difficult task for the team that we're paying attention to in Fordham going forward. And this is just a really good conference and has become one over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and Dayton bring back Chapman and Watson too. I mean, their big losses were obviously Toppin and Mike Sell from a year ago. But like you mentioned, I mean, when you have Anthony Grant, who was the coach of the year a year ago, in the entire nation, you're going to be successful regardless. And I mean, VCU lost a lot of guys, but they've played some teams tough early on. They played West Virginia tough the other day. And Nashawn Highland's a really good player. And the way they play just gives a lot of teams trouble. So like you mentioned, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch in the Atlantic 10. That's enough for our college hoops talk. We're going to talk about a lot this year because, listen, there's going to be a lot to cover because who knows what is going to happen with this college hoops season. It's going to be very volatile. Scheduling is going to remain like that, and it'll be very interesting to watch along the way. 118 here on One-on-One, Highland DeLuca, once again bringing you till 2 a.m., and we're going to shift into our final headline segment with Thomas Quigley coming up next.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Free agency has made headline after headline in the past 2 weeks, with many players receiving massive contracts and extensions. I want to get your guys' reaction to some of the more interesting deals we've seen thus far. So first off, Gordon Hayward, he leaves the Celtics after 3 injury-plagued seasons to sign a 4-year deal worth $120 million with the Charlotte Hornets. Jackson.
I thought Hayward was crazy to opt out, and then I realized that some of these guys that were a lot worse than Gordon Hayward were getting paid a lot of damn money. And somehow I don't get the steal from a Hornets perspective. I really don't. I mean, you're dealing with a team that you just got rid of Nicholas Batum and tried to shed off his $27 million. And this is just a year removed after they weren't willing to pay Kemba Walker. So you settle for Gordon Hayward, a guy who came off the bench for a large portion of last year with Boston. And Gordon Hayward was good last year. You got to give him credit. Coming off that injury, it's a tough injury to come off of. But to give a guy like Hayward at this point, who is good and makes his teammates better, and I like his brand of basketball, but to give him $30 million a year over 4, this is a sell contract for me. I don't like this one bit.
It's such a weird situation, as you mentioned, and I thought it hit pretty well, Jackson. It's just like, of all the places you're expecting Gordon Hayward to sign,
Yeah.
it's Charlotte. It was just such a like I saw it on my phone, right? You get the Woj bomb on Twitter, you get the notification that comes up, and it's like, wait, did I read that right? Charlotte? It's just such a it was such a weird signing, and not something that we had expected. Honestly, I would have been more. I would have expected more that it was the Knicks or something like that. You know,
Yeah.
the Knicks are just desperately scrambling to try and get someone of value to come and play for their organization. Whereas Charlotte, they're kind of in between. And that's the biggest thing for me. It's like, what kind of organization are the Charlotte Hornets? Are they sort of a smaller market team that knows that they have to build through the draft? Is it sort of the San Antonio model, or are they a team that knows that they can attract big time free agents in, you know, whatever organization you're going to talk about, whether it be the Lakers or Miami or some of those traditional NBA powers? And to me, it just seems like it was such a weird thing because it leaves Charlotte in the middle. Gordon Hayward isn't this big time free agent. They gave him big time free agent money, but he's not. It's not to diminish. He's a very good player, but he's probably not someone who you are sitting there feeling good about as your highest paid number one option going forward. It's not. This isn't Butler anymore. He's got to actually produce in the NBA. So, are you building through the draft? This is a team that selected 3 overall. It's LaMelo Ball. Are you trying to bring in young players and figure things out that way? Or are you trying to be a team that's going to go out and spend and try and be active as much as possible in free agency? Now, those two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but for a guy like Hayward, who is, I think, a glorified, I'll backtrack that, but is maybe a role player on steroids, can do more for you, but is a guy who needs to be in the right situation. He reminds me a lot of Chris Bosh in that way, where it's not that they're similar players in the way, in the style of play,
But their roles.
just a guy who is can be an all-star as a role player, but is not going to be successful when he is not in the right situation. That was, to me, the most interesting thing, or the most surprising and puzzling thing about this. It doesn't feel like Gordon Hayward is going to be in the right situation, and he's making a lot of money doing that.
I think you made a very good point by saying that Charlotte is stuck in the middle, and that's the worst place you can be in the NBA. That to me is NBA purgatory, where you're stuck hovering around for a playoff spot. It's kind of honestly where they were with Kemba for the large portion of his time in Charlotte. That's where they were. They were stuck in the middle. They were a walking first round exit because they would find a way to play the Heat every year and get swept in that regard. So that's where I'm at with that deal. I'm completely on board with it. I think Chris Bosh is a better player than you're letting on a little bit, because I think he was at a point where, listen, he was a superstar in Toronto, and he was really damn good, but just didn't have the surrounding pieces. And listen, he was the third wheel when he was in Miami, but he was still a really good third wheel. So that's where I'm at with that. But I'm in full agreement. I don't like this signing. Let's go to the next one, Quigs.
Yeah, so number 2, Brandon Ingram re-signs with the New Orleans Pelicans for 5 years, $158 million. This is after his first season in New Orleans.
That's an interesting one too. I like this deal better. I mean, it's coming off his rookie max extension. But he was terrific last year, and I think it's going to be really interesting to look at how he handles playing a full season with Zion, and how much his role will change, given that Zion's going to be one of the main guys in that offense. So I like the deal. I think from a talent perspective, Ingram can do it. Maybe jump the gun a little early, giving him that much money after really only one good season. But overall, I'm into buying on young talent, and for that reason, I like this deal.
Especially if you are New Orleans, who has made it their priority to build through the draft. There's never been a player who sits there and is going to be ultra successful at attracting free agents. Now, Brandon Ingram was superb this past year. 24, 6, and 4 is really good. And at some level, they're worried about going forward. Are you going to look at this like an Anthony Davis situation where you're trying to build that surrounding cast? and it didn't work out towards the end with Anthony Davis. And maybe that's the impetus for saying, you know what, we better lock him up sooner rather than later, because I agree, you probably want more of a sample size than just the 1 year and the fit New Orleans, especially when you want to figure out how exactly he's going to coexist with your number 1 overall pick in Zion Williamson and a guy you have a lot invested in. But the future is bright for New Orleans, and I think Brandon Ingram can be at the forefront of that. He has quietly become one of the better players in the NBA. I mean, he's really that talented. We knew the talent was there. It was about getting him to continue to grow into that. You love the size that he brings to the table, and that length is somebody who's just special from a physical standpoint. So I like what Brandon Ingram has done. And I think if you want to keep him around, if you're a team like New Orleans, who is not this crazy destination in the past of we're going to get a bunch of free agents, you got to strike while the iron's hot. And Brandon Ingram is a guy that they trust. And to make the deal made sense, even if it is maybe a year too early and too much money, it's better to be safe than sorry than walk into another situation where you're saying, okay, where am I trading Brandon Ingram to now?
Just a thing to note also, Drew Holiday obviously got traded to the Bucks, which I thought was maybe one of the most underrated moves of this offseason. I love Drew Holiday, great defender, one of the best two-way guards in the entire NBA, but that means even more touches for Brandon Ingram. And I know Holiday wasn't a ball-dominant guard, but now Ingram is going to get more touches that he maybe would have lost to Zion. So that's something to monitor. Our final deal in Miami, Quiggs, what we got?
Yep. So fresh off their run to the finals, Miami big Bam Adebayo just re-signed for $195 million over 5 years.
I like this deal. I think Bam is the most improved player in the NBA going each of the last 2 seasons, to be quite honest with you. He's one of the most unique players in the league because his ability to play defense at all levels, given his size and athleticism, is very unique. And his ability to score really at all levels has expanded because he can now shoot the ball. He's an incredible rebounder on both sides of the floor. But I think his defense is the biggest thing that he brings to Miami because it's not only an individual perspective, but Jimmy Butler, he's a big part of that culture with him on the defensive side of the floor. And he may not be as talkative of a leader as Butler is, but he's certainly as effective as Jimmy Butler is. So I love this deal for Miami. I love this deal for Bam. He deserves it as well. And I think he's a guy, as long as he's able to stay healthy, there's no ceiling for this guy going forward. If he continues to develop the jump shot, I mean, I could see him easily being a guy who can put up, if Butler wasn't there, he's a guy who I think could put up 25 and 12 each night if he wanted to with 5 assists. But in that balanced offense, he's a guy that can go off on any given night.
Well, I certainly agree with you in liking this deal for Bam. Anytime you take $195 million to the bank, that's not a bad day. So, yes, I certainly like it for him. But as you pointed out, he certainly deserves it. And to me, the other angle to take this, or one of the other aspects of it, is that he has continued to improve every year he's been in the NBA. And that, to me, is the player that you want to invest in. It's the guys that improve. And even circling back to Brandon Ingram in that same way, that's why teams want to give these types of players that type of money and these types of contracts, because they're going to get better. And that's, to me, the biggest thing about Bam Adebayo is, you mentioned he has become more explosive in different aspects of their offense. Well, that has been a continued progression as he has extended his range and become more of a complete player on the offensive side of the floor, and also being a great rebounder and a rim protector and everything that he does and does for that Miami team, and was a big reason why they were where they were at the end of it in the bubble in Orlando. And he is, as you mentioned, is there a better big man in the NBA? I don't think so. And that contract proves it, right? That's at the end of the day where it is in a game in a game in the NBA where we are trending away from big men. Bam Adebayo has found sort of that way of making himself useful. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but we've seen it with guys like Joel Embiid, who are just so one-dimensional. As another guy, you say, okay, he's a really good big man, but there are limitations to his game. You don't see that in that same way with Bam Adebayo, and he's deserving of every penny of the contract that he just signed, and certainly good for Miami to be able to keep him around.
Let's not forget about Anthony Davis. He's not the best big man in the NBA, but he's up there for sure.
See, Anthony Davis is such of a freak that I don't even think about him as a big man.
You think of him as just his own tier. He's a positionless basketball player.
Anthony Davis isn't a position, doesn't play a position. He just is Anthony Davis. So forgive me. True. Yes, I agree with you there. If we're considering Anthony Davis a big man, it's just, I guess I don't
say the same thing about Bam though, in terms of that, in terms of his style of basketball as well. But point taken on AD. But obviously I'm in full agreement with you. I think we both voiced our opinions there. That'll wrap it up for headlines. Quig's gonna stay with us though. Time for Rantsgiving, folks. Coming back 1:31 here on One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, taking you till 2 a.m. Thanks for sticking with us. However you may be tuning in, 90.7. YouTube Live, Facebook Live. We'd love to have you here and stick with us till the end of our show. Once again, Rantsgiving when we come back.
Has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Show. Heil and DeLuca and Quiggs here with us, taking you to 2 a.m. here on this very early Sunday morning. Glad you could be with us and glad you've been with us, however you may be tuning in, whether it be via the radio, via online, via YouTube Live, or via Facebook Live. We'd love to have you. We appreciate all of our listeners for joining us. And like I mentioned, time for Rantsgiving. We gave thanks on Thursday. We were thankful for everything, but listen, there's a lot in sports that I am not thankful for. I'll be the first to admit that. I mean, I know our producer Alex can specifically attest to just seeing all my misery on this show, talking about how difficult of a life I live as a sports fan. I'm going to go last. I'm going to self-volunteer myself to go last because I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for the pain I'm about to administer on myself. But who would like to go first? Once again, Rantsgiving, the idea that, listen, we need to let off some steam about things in sports that we may not be so thankful for. So Quiggs or DeLuca, I'll give you guys the floor. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll take you up on that. Personally, I'm very thankful for team ownership that serves the fans' needs first. A great example of this, my beloved Boston Red Sox. Boston Red Sox ownership knows how much we value Fenway Sports Group's bottom line. Mookie Betts, a generational talent, a top 5 player, the first MVP in Boston since Dustin Pedroia back in 2008. No, fans don't care about that. We care about that nasty luxury tax imposed on teams with an abundance of money, which is why I'm even more thankful that our fearless ownership decided it would be brilliant to celebrate this crowning achievement of spending less money on beloved players in order to turn a larger profit by tweeting about it in September. John Henry, Sam Kennedy, and company, they get it. They get it. Fans don't care about their favorite players or their team having success on the field. We just want our team owners to achieve financial success no matter the cost. And for that, I'm thankful.
That was awesome.
That's well done right there.
That was terrific.
That's well done.
There's
Listen,
a lot of reason to give thanks.
man, you have it so hard as a Boston fan. What a hard life you.
I will say that he's put on it's been a good 20 years for John Henry. So this is one thing that I'm a little less thankful for, but plenty of reason to be thankful as a Boston sports fan.
You really realize how good Boston fans have it when that's like the biggest thing they're complaining about is like, oh, the Red Sox ownership, man. Yeah, and then listen, trading Mookie Betts, that does suck. As someone who roots for the Orioles and having to trade Manny Machado, I've been there where you've had to trade arguably your most talented player in, 3 decades, essentially.
I mean, at least Manny Machado didn't win a World Series the very next year. That was brutal.
At least Mookie Betts won a World Series with the Boston Red Sox. Yeah, so I'll play that right back on you. But, yeah, no, but that was good. Well done, Quigs. And we'll move on to the not so miserable life of Nick DeLuca. What do you got for us?
I'm always happy to be here. So that's that. But I am thankful for all the Bills haters who tell me that the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East, right? I'm approaching my 21st birthday here, and the Bills have not won a playoff game in my lifetime. They went the first 17 years of my life without making the playoffs, and now we've made it 2 of the last 3 years, working on 3 out of the last 4. We've got our franchise quarterback, Josh Allen. We're rolling. We're ready to go. And then I get these people who sit there and say that the Bills have 7 wins against teams with, I think it's 7 wins against teams with winning records. Like all their wins have come against teams with winning records this year. If not, it's close. And they've played a pretty difficult strength of schedule this year. Get these people who tell me, oh, yeah, the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East because they won 5 games in a row. 5-game winning streak, 23-17, a win over the 49ers. It was really impressive. Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't hurt, so he was fully healthy, and I'm so thankful that means the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East. Then they played a really tough game, 24-0 win over the Jets, man. The Jets battled. I'll tell you that. What Greg Williams and Adam Gase are doing, they battled. And then they beat the Rams. Rams are a good team, but, playing 1 o'clock across the country, kick return for a touchdown. The Cardinals, They beat the Cardinals. Oh, wow, this is a really good team. They're racking up the wins. They got outgained by over 100 yards and win the game by 3. Defense plays well. And they beat the Chargers. Chargers are 3-7. But hey, this is a team. They're better than the Bills. They're going to win the AFC East. They're 4th in scoring defense. All right, cool. 4th worst in total offense. They averaged 210 passing yards a game during their 5-game win streak, in which they won games where they had a blocked punt for a touchdown. Kick return touchdown. They won a game when their quarterback threw for 93 yards. 93. And then comes Denver. I actually am thankful for the Denver Broncos because they just lay an egg. And then they screw up their whole quarterback situation. Hey, we'll take a guy in the top 5, but then we'll just screw the whole thing up by bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick. And what does Fitzpatrick do? The soul-crushing interception. So the Dolphins may be a good team. They may have a bright future, but they're not in the top 5 of the NFL. They're not in the top 5 of the AFC. They're not winning the division. This is the Bills' year. And if I have to hear one more person say, oh, the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East, I'm done. I've had it. I'm not talking to you. I am so thankful for all the people that tell me, oh, the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East.
Nick, I think the Dolphins are going to win the AFC East.
I wish I had technical difficulties right now.
That was very good, by the way. I want to say that was very good. Well done. Well done. Listen, I don't think it's crazy to say they're going to win the AFC East. Their schedule's pretty easy down the stretch other than the Chiefs. But we're going to remember this big time if for some reason the AFC East it comes down to week 17, Bills, Dolphins, and the Dolphins come out on top. This will be played every day for the next, actually every day for eternity.
You will see it all over Twitter. Just
Yes.
everywhere.
This will not
Everyone
leave
clowning Nick DeLuca.
Twitter.
I will ride with number 17 in week 17 all day. I'm not worried at all.
I love your confidence. That's something you certainly don't lack. Something I don't lack either. But
You're confident in the 0-10 Jets?
no,
Oh, okay.
I'm confident in them to get Trevor Lawrence. Actually, I shouldn't even say that.
Yeah, you
But
shouldn't.
anyways, well done, Nick DeLuca. That was excellent. I was trying to think of I had a few directions I could have gone with this because my life as a sports fan is so miserable. So I decided to keep it overall general. So I'm thankful to be a sports fan. I'm thankful to root for the New York Jets, who have the worst coach in the history of professional sports, are 0-10 and en route to a 0-16 season. And the worst part is if they don't go 0-16, they still won't get the number 1 overall pick and they won't get Trevor Lawrence this year. So I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful to have to root for losing each and every year. I'm thankful to have not seen a playoff game since 2010. So that's what I'm thankful for on the Jets side. As for the Rangers, I am thankful for 10 straight seasons of winning hockey, only to break my heart year in and year out and not win a Stanley Cup. I'm thankful to lose 3 overtime games in the Stanley Cup final. I'm thankful to watch Henrik Lundqvist, the guy I grew up loving and who was my idol as a sports fan. I'm thankful to watch him go to my least favorite team in the Washington Capitals, even though his time was certainly up in New York. I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful for Henrique in overtime in Game 6. I'm thankful for Alec Martinez in Game 5, winning the Stanley Cup. I am thankful for Alex Killorn scoring the game winner in Game 7 and the Rangers scoring 0 goals in Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals at home. And what was the last time they were close? I'm thankful for Alain Vigneault putting Nick Holden and Mark Stahl on the ice every time in a big spot when they don't belong there. So that's what I'm thankful for at the Rangers. Now let's get into the Knicks. Oh, that's a good one. I'm really thankful for them. I'm thankful for 1 playoff series win in my entire lifetime. I'm thankful for Phil Jackson, who completely tore this organization apart. I'm thankful that he was able to draft Kristaps Porzingis only for him to be traded. And you know who I'm really thankful for? Thankful for James Dolan. I'm really thankful for that guy because he's been the best owner of my lifetime. And he's the guy that fired Donnie Walsh. He hired Phil Jackson. And he's put the Knicks consistently in a position to lose basketball games. So I'm very thankful for that. And I'm very thankful for Carmelo Anthony being blocked by Roy Hibbert in Game 6. And I'm very thankful for so much of what the Knicks have brought to me. And by so much, I mean exactly 1 playoff series win. Now let's move on to the Baltimore Orioles, which is where I will end this rant. I'm thankful for 12 straight seasons to start my lifetime of a losing record. I'm thankful for 4 winning seasons in my lifetime. I'm thankful for Manny Machado, who was the most talented player in the history of this organization, who they only kept for 6 years before trading him. I'm thankful for letting Adam Jones walk out the door, who is probably the most influential baseball player in my lifetime. And I'm thankful for all of the losing baseball in the early 2000s from, oh man, where do I start? I don't even know where to start. And for that reason, I'm going to end right there because I can't get into any more misery when it comes to my life as a sports fan. So I'm thankful for being a sports fan. And as the great Trill Withers says on Twitter, you have to be damn crazy to be a sports fan. And for that reason, I am damn crazy. And I might be insane, to be completely honest with you, because as much at losing as I keep seeing, I come back every day with a smile on my face, prepared for pain yet again. And that will do it for Rantsgiving. Whew. That was long. That was depressing. And I don't even want to hear opinions on it because it'll just cause more pain. So on that note, happy Rantsgiving. Hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll be right back. We're going to close it out on a less depressing topic, and I got a bold pick this week, and Nick DeLuca isn't going to like it. Find out what it is when we come back. 146 here on One-on-One. Highland, DeLuca, and Quigley taking you to the end here on One-on-One. We'll be right back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Longest running sports call-in show. Glad you can join us on 90.7, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, however you are tuning into us today. Thank you to all our listeners for being with us, and we're glad to have you. And we're going to wrap up these final 12 minutes with our picks for the week. Jackson Heil, Nick DeLuca, Thomas Quigley here with you. We got some good games to get to. I got some interesting picks this week, I know for sure. And we'll have Quigs read out each of these games, and Quigs, feel free to give your picks as well, but we'll get right into it. And Quigs, let's take it away.
Let's start it off with Chargers and Bills in Buffalo.
Oof, what a fitting start. I'm all over I'm all over the Los Angeles Chargers this week. And that's my bold pick of the week for sure. I know DeLuca ain't going to be too happy with it, but not that he really cares too much either way. But Chargers have been in way too many games this year, and I think looking what they're able to do from an offensive standpoint, I love Justin Herbert. The only thing I would be worried about if I'm the Chargers, not the only thing, but because there's a lot to be worried about going up against this good 7-3 Bills team who are in first place in the AFC East. Will they be able to get production at the wide receiver position other than Keenan Allen? Because you have to think Tre'Davious White is going to be shadowing Keenan Allen wherever he goes on the field. And I think they will be able to get enough production out of Mike Williams, Hunter Henry. I think this Chargers offense is going to be good enough to pull it out. And I don't know. There's something about the Bills recently that they've been rubbing me the wrong way a little bit. I don't know what it is specifically. I can't really put my finger on it. But I like the way the Chargers have been playing. They've been pretty much every game. They've had some big leads that they've blown late, but I trust them to be in this game late. And the line is like 5.5 right now. That line's begging you to take the Bills, which is why we take the Chargers here.
Done yet? All right.
Yep.
Sean McDermott became the head coach of the Buffalo Bills in 2017. Since then, the Bills are 3-0 in each of the game off the bye in each of the years that he has been the head coach in Buffalo. The Bills are winning this game, and I like what they're doing going forward. I mean, yeah, okay, I guess they rubbed you the wrong way. They had an outstanding win against Seattle. They were DeAndre Hopkins' heroics away from winning a game on the road in Arizona in which they played really poorly in the second half. So if they're good enough to beat a team when they don't play well like Arizona, I think they should be able to take care of the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Herbert has struggled at times when things don't start out well. I think that Sean McDermott can take advantage of what the deficiencies are for the Los Angeles Chargers on that defense. Where the Bills have had trouble, it's against teams with really good and heavy running games. I do expect the Chargers to be able to run the football, but that's not their strong suit. That's not what they want to do. And I think that it puts the Bills in a really good matchup. In addition to that, because you picked the Chargers, just as I finish here, Chris Davis has 2 years, $34 million remaining on his contract with the Orioles. I'm picking the Bills.
Austin Eckler back this week, by the way, for the Chargers in all likelihood, which is a big return. And thank you for the Chris Davis notion. Not that it really matters all that much over the next 2 years because the Orioles won't be playing any winning baseball over the next 2 years. But, I like the Chargers on Sunday, and I like them to take down the Bills, and we may have a battle for first place coming up soon with the Miami Dolphins, who might win the division. So there we go. Quiggs, what do you got?
See, what's great is that I don't have to make the absurd pick of picking the Chargers just to see Nick's reaction because I've already seen it and it was great. So I got to go with the Bills because there's just no way that the Chargers beat them. So we just have to move on, I guess, because I don't know. It's definitely Bills. So Titans versus Colts. This is in Indy. Big battle of the AFC South. We got.
I'm going to take the Titans here. I think it's not a trap game per se because it is for first place, but Colts coming off a very emotional win at home in overtime over the Packers, a game where they've really fought back. They were down 2 touchdowns. I think only the 4th time in Aaron Rodgers' entire career where he's lost a game where he led by 14 points or more. But I like the Titans. I think they're coming off a big win against the Ravens at home. I think they're starting to finally trend back in the right direction. They lost me for a little bit after that really hot start where they lost back-to-back games. But I like the Titans here, and I think they win on the road and go to first place in the AFC South.
This is as difficult a game to pick as you'll find. I'm looking up and down at something to try and tell me which team to pick one way or the other. And I think this is a game. You talk about, we had to watch the Lions on Thanksgiving against Houston. This is a game I wish I got to watch during Thanksgiving. This is going to be great football. I'm going to go with Indy here. And maybe the only reason why is that they're at home. Mm-hmm. And I just like the team that's going to be home here. I think they have some momentum going forward, although Tennessee does too with a big win over Baltimore. I liked what I saw out of their defense in particular, and I think that Indianapolis is going to do enough defensively to make things tough on Tennessee. The passing game hasn't been excellent for the Titans this year, maybe in the way that it was even last year when Ryan Tannehill really got hot, although I think he's playing good football. I think Indy can do enough to be disruptive to win this game at home. It's going to be a close one. This is a toss-up, but I'm forced to pick somebody, so I'm going to go with the Colts. I
got to go with the Titans here, and really just because of their quarterback. Ryan Tannehill has been one of the best quarterbacks over the last season and a half, which is something you just wouldn't even dream of saying 3 years ago. And, this is going to be a good one. This is going to be a very fun game to watch, and it's maybe by a slim margin, but got to go with the Titans. So now to the Thanksgiving type terrible 2 teams game, Giants and Bengals in Cincinnati. What do you got?
You're a freak if you pick the Bengals in this game. I'm all on the Giants here. I think the Giants are the most talented team, and not most talented. I think they're the best team in the NFC East right now. And I think this is a game they should win. With that said, if they lose this game, they should be exiled from the National Football League. No Joe Burrow for the Bengals, obviously, after that really gruesome injury last week. Prayers up to him. Hopefully he has a safe recovery. But there's no way the Giants lose this game, and their season's over if they do. So I'm going to go with the G-Men here.
You're right to say their season's over if they do. I just don't see how they would. Brandon Allen is going to be playing quarterback for Cincinnati. He's not very good. He replaces Ryan Finley, who also isn't very good. The Bengals team outside of Joe Burrow isn't very good, and Joe Burrow won't be playing on Sunday. So the only thing that could possibly lead someone to pick Cincinnati in this game would be the potential letdown, as in the Giants wouldn't be prepared to play. That does not sound like Joe Judge at all. The Giants are going to roll in this one.
Who would you say is playing quarterback for them?
Brandon Allen.
I've never even heard of him.
He played for Denver sparingly last year when Locke got hurt.
Good grief. That's a tough scene. If the Giants lose that game, yeah, send them packing to the XFL. Quake, sorry, what do you got?
This is a game for fantasy owners and fans that find joy in seeing their team lose. So I certainly won't be watching it, but I will definitely pick the Giants over the Bengals. The Bengals have nothing to play for. The Giants somehow have something to play for. Giants take this one. Moving on. Cardinals, Patriots in Foxborough. What do you got?
I got to take the Cardinals. Coming off a long week after the Thursday night loss to the Seahawks, I'm just not a believer in the Pats this year. Yeah, they've won a few games at home, particularly to the Ravens, which was a big win, but big time letdown last week against the Texans, who I think are actually pretty good. They just have had terrible coaching staffs in front of them, and now that Bill O'Brien's gone, I think they're a much better team than the record indicates. I'm on the Cardinals this week. I think it'll be probably a close game, and I think Bill Belichick will be able to give Kyler and company some trouble. And Kyler is playing. That's something to note after the shoulder issues on Thursday night, but I'm rolling with the Cardinals here.
I am too, and ordinarily this type of game is one where I've got my radar on for a potential upset. Again, a West Coast team coming east to play at 1 o'clock is generally not a great recipe for success. That said, I just don't know that New England has enough offensively. I think their defense can find some success in this game, and Arizona won't be able to put up the 35 points that they generally do as a really good offense. But even so, I just don't know that I have enough confidence in New England to be able to control that game and going forward, that offense and Cam Newton and what has and hasn't happened. So I'm going to have to go with Arizona here, although I think this can be a pretty close game. Line's at 2.5. I think that's about right.
Yeah, you guys are both of you are going to hate me for saying this, but I think I'm starting to come to terms with the fact that my football team might not be that great. And it's difficult, and I know you guys wouldn't get it, but anyway, the Patriots, I definitely did not pick them beating the Ravens a couple weeks ago. That was definitely a surprise to many people. And I think that could end up being a similar situation here. It's not prime time, and it's probably not going to be a monsoon, but Belichick doesn't let you come in and win easily in New England. I'm going to say that 49ers game was a fluke, but I still got to go with the Cardinals. They're a top 5 team in the NFL. Kyler Murray is kind of just, something we haven't really seen.
Top 5 in the NFL.
I think so. Yes, definitely. They're if it weren't for a very highly contested game against the Seahawks, they might be leading the best division in football. But yes, I will pick them over the Patriots this Sunday, even though my heart says no. Chiefs, Bucks. This is Brady versus Mahomes part 4, and it is in Tampa. We got
to wrap this up quickly, but I'm going to go with the Chiefs here. I think the Bucks are frauds, to be honest, because of their quarterback. I love their defense and I love their weapons, and I think they have really everything outside of the quarterback and the coach. But I love the way the Chiefs are playing right now. I love what Patrick Mahomes is doing. Thrilling Sunday night win over the Raiders on the road. I like the Chiefs in this one.
It's the Chiefs, and it's because of Patrick Mahomes.
Chiefs.
Guys, it's been a pleasure as always. Nick, great being back with you. Quigs, good to see you as always. Shout out Alex Wolves for keeping us on the air throughout this entire thing, even during our technical difficulties. But we appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate you guys watching. Once again, from Nick DeLuca, from Thomas Quigley, I'm Jackson Heil. Shout out again, Alex Wolves, and our sports director, Bobby Chaffardini. Thanks to our guest, Stefan Bondi of the New York Daily News, for coming on and giving us some time today to talk about the Knicks. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. And my last thing today, I'd like the Dolphins to win the AFC East. Have a good one, everybody.